Our guest tonight was supposed to be quiet for starters. Our guest tonight was supposed to be Richard Hilleman from Electronic Arts. He ran into a storm of canceled flights, and so we're going to try to rebook him for, well, not much later in the semester because we don't have much later in the semester. But in his stead, we have an able replacement, Gordon Walton. There he is. Back in the late 90s, I believe. Anyway, Gordon's been around forever, almost, well, actually probably longer than me. Started out making all sorts of hardcore simulations and weirdness after graduating from Texas A&M. Had to get that in. And then did more hardcore simulations and things at Kesmai and elsewhere. Kesmai is an interesting thing. We'll probably talk some about that. A pioneer in the online space. Went to Electronic Art, well, Origin, sorry, where he worked with Richard and others on various Ultima Online games. And then from there, actually got the chance to work with Will Wright there on the left side of that picture on The Sims Online. Came back to Austin, which we were all happy about here, and worked for Sony Online Entertainment on more online games, the Star Wars Galaxies games, and now is one of the guys heading up Bioware Austin, which was recently acquired by Electronic Arts, sort of completing an interesting circle. Working on some mysterious thing that I'm sure he won't tell us about because he's way too good at keeping secrets, unlike me. But maybe we get him to spill something. So he's also, in addition to just being an all-around great developer and great guy, he is an educator. And I thought this quote was pretty amazing. If you're not interested in learning, you should not be in the game industry. Boy, is that true. There have been a lot of changes in 5 years. Boy, is that true. Most people don't make 10 years in the business. I'm going to stop saying, boy, is that true. You get the idea. It's not a stable business. Okay, I got to say it. Boy, is that true. And get the best education you can afford. I love the fact that he's get an art education, learning to learn, critical, and boy, is it Darwinian. So be ready for that. At GDC 2003, I'm hoping I can get him to elaborate on some of this. You can look back now, Gordon, if you want.
No, I can see it.
Okay. Where are you seeing it? Oh my gosh, he's watching the reflection. That is so geeky. The geek level just went way high. He's probably reading it backwards and translating it into Swahili in real time or something. But he gave a talk about the top 10 reasons not to make an MMO. So now that he's done 14 or 15 of them, I want to see if he still believes any of this stuff. So that is Gordon Walton. And we will go back to the beginning so we can chat a bit. Just to bear in mind that Rich canceled this morning, so there's not a lot of prep time here. So bear with me, and you might have to ask a lot of questions. So get ready. All right, I'm going to drop my pen. In fairly typical fashion, we're going to start with a little biography, because I don't actually know much about where you came from. So where are you from? And I mean that literally and metaphorically.
Well, I'm from Houston originally, so I'm a native Texan here in Austin. Yay! And I grew up in Houston. Lived there until I was about 18. Then joined the Army, saw the world, and which was interesting. And when I came back from my little tour of duty, I started college up in Killeen, right next to Fort Hood. After I got back, and I wanted to do computer stuff. I'd done computer stuff in high school, basically learned how to program in BASIC and learned how to program every punch card machine known to man, which was all programmed with wires on boards, which was bizarre, to say the least, and doing punch tape and all that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of a really old school, computer guy in the big scheme of things. And so that intrigued me, and when I was in the Army, I would go in and they go, well, what do you want to do? Well, I should do some computer stuff. Oh, great, we'll put you in Signal, which meant stringing wire in the woods, all the time, and climbing really tall poles at a time that I was deathly afraid of heights. Now I'm more deathly afraid of other things than heights, so heights aren't that bad. So But it was an interesting time. I wouldn't trade the first 6 months of the Army for almost anything, but the other 2.5 years I probably could have done without. So, but yeah, I came back and went to go get a CS degree. And interestingly, right as I got back from, I was overseas in Germany then. I got back in August of '77. And a buddy that was still on Fort Hood said, "Oh, I've got access to this cool thing down in this tunnel underneath a mountain, that I go do on the weekends. You want to come with me?" I said, "Sure." I could still pass for looking like I was actually, military. And so on the weekends we started going down, and it literally was in a tunnel underneath a mountain. So you rode a bicycle because it was too far to walk underneath the mountain to this Play-Doh terminal. And so the Play-Doh terminal is connected to 1,000 other terminals scattered all over the nation. And of course, what is everybody doing on there? They're playing games, multiplayer games. So we were playing both single player and multiplayer games on this terminal, and we would do the 48-hour marathon session, breaking into the Coke machine kind of stuff, because you don't want to leave to go get something to eat or drink.
Sure.
And we did that for a few months, and that really kind of was the beginning of the end when you get down to it.
So was this kind of Star Trek and that sort of thing?
Oh yeah, like the Star
Trek,
the early Star graphical games. Remember, Play-Doh was graphical, even though it was monotone. And yeah, so I was playing Empire, which was a real-time 3D or 2D Star Trek game, and Avatar, which was an early Dungeons and Dragons kind of game, and they were awesome. And so, at that time, there weren't any microcomputers. The TRS-80 was just coming out. The Apple I was out, but the Apple II was announced and not out yet. And the PET 2001 were all three announced, but just barely starting to hit the market. So I had this choice. I could either go back to Europe and see my friends, or I could buy a computer, or I could buy a car. And I decided to buy the computer. So I bought a PET, actually. I'd actually already programmed the game I wanted in BASIC ahead of time, and I was waiting to get the computer. And it was an interesting time. I was going to school doing mainframe software at the time, so doing IBM 360 and 370 assembler, and of course Fortran and COBOL and you name it. And that was really cool at the time. But having a microcomputer was like a dream come true. I could do computing and not wait overnight to find out what happened. And I didn't have to do punch cards, which was another wonderful advancement, I thought. So that's what got me into it in the beginning. Strangely enough, that fall, right at the end of almost Christmas time, I got in a motorcycle accident. So I got run over, scrunched like so motorcycles, really fun. Mass equation with you and cars doesn't work. They have more mass, bad things happen when they connect. So I ended up moving back to Houston to recuperate. And when I did that, I saw a job in the paper for a microcomputer company. And I went, crap, I know how to program, at least a little bit. And I applied, and because they were desperate, they hired me, which was awesome. And so I was writing utilities for 6800s at the time, and 6502 processors. And that gave me an opportunity to write another computer game in assembler, actually, which was kind of fun. Before I decided to put it on a microcomputer, I was putting it on this, it was still a microcomputer, but it was more like a mainframe microcomputer. It wasn't set up for consumer use. It was like S100 bus stuff, which nobody here remembers. And that got me, that just furthered the damage, is what I would say, to where I go, I'd rather do this than actually have a real job. What's a real job like? And so I ended up, doing that for a while until the company went bankrupt, which is what happens to a lot of small companies. One day you show up and the door's locked and you never get your last check and all that kind of stuff.
Still happens.
Well, pretty much, but that's in the games business. That happens a lot. This wasn't the games business, really. At the same time I was going to school, I was going to school then at university at Clear Lake City down in Houston, and kind of when the job went away, I said, well, maybe I should go back and really get my degree. I'd still be legitimate if I actually got a degree. which was, of course, could have been good thinking. I don't know at the time, but I actually I was kind of bought into the fact that I needed to be legitimate. So I looked at Rice, and Rice said, yeah, your dad went to Rice, but you're too stupid to go to Rice, so, we're not going to take you as a transfer student. They only take a few people. And, I wouldn't say I'm highly academically oriented. School was always boring, I thought, until I got older, and then school got interesting.
Whew. Okay.
You thought it was just you?
No. I'm worried about the message we're sending.
Oh, no. But it was boring,
Okay.
for me. And, I wasn't challenged, is what I'm thinking.
I used to sit and make lists of my favorite cars and my favorite movies.
So I finally ended up going to A&M, who did accept me, which was nice. And they also accepted a crap load of my prior work, and I tested out of a year, almost 2 years of school, which was fortunate because that made it less boring. And decided to get a CS degree there at Texas A&M. And while I was there, what I did is I wrote games and published them through a little company called Instant Software, which was part of Kilobaud Microcomputing magazine. They basically had a little software thing. So I took the games I'd written and sent them over there, and next thing you know, they published them, and they sent me a check every month. And I really liked that. Getting paid, at that time maybe $80 to $300 a month was actually not bad money if you were going to school on the GI Bill and had another part-time job. I was actually wealthy relative to most other students, which I liked. So, and school didn't take up that much time, so I could still write games and have a part-time job and all that other stuff at the same time. So I guess the whole workaholic thing is really helpful if you're going to be in the games business at some level.
And Gordon has that in spades. So the first game I know of that you worked on was a thing called Trek X.
Trek X.
Was that one of these things?
It was not the first game I wrote. It was the first game I published.
Aha. Okay. And what were the circumstances of that?
Well, so basically, playing Empire on the Plato system with at that time 60 or 70 people at a time was just super cool. And what I did is I emulated that and wrote a single-player game that was like that on the PET 2001 with character graphics. And so you were in the center of the screen driving through space, and you'd have encounters, and you'd have to get through them, and you'd have to get from one place to another to do stuff and, blow people up, of course. You got to blow people up. Very important.
And so
no negotiation in the old Star Trek games, only the new ones.
So this wasn't, in fact, a Star Trek game? And
it was a Star Trek game, so I ripped off Star Trek and didn't get sued by Paramount, praise the Lord.
Okay. So then the next thing in your bio is going on and founding a company of your own.
Yeah. So
What
I
was up with
actually,
that?
so I make it through college, right? I finally, suffer long enough and hard enough. I basically did the wrong thing again in college. I did all my major stuff, and then I spent the last year and a half doing all the stuff that wasn't my major. Some of which were prerequisites for my major stuff. But nonetheless, so it was like slogging. Very wrong way to do it. Don't do that. Do this. They have them in order for some reason. I just didn't see it at the time. I'm not too bright about these kind of things. So yeah, it was I suffered a lot to finish the degree because you start something, you want to finish it. Starting and finishing, very important for the game business. We love to hire finishers. So when I got out of school, I went, well, now it's time to grow up. I need a legitimate job. So I actually went to work for a company doing mapping software down in Houston. Like, again, it was a venture capital startup kind of company doing mapping, like traditional mapping software for like municipalities where they, do the street map, then they do all the maps for all the stuff, like the pipes and the wires and everything else overlaying it. And it was all on decks, and I liked working on the VAXs, and they were doing a big, kind of deck PDP-11 to VAX port of all this stuff. And so that was kind of cool, and it didn't take up any more than 9 hours a day, so I could go write my games on the side, and I actually went to work for the local microcomputer retailer teaching classes at night. So that was kind of fun too. And next thing I know, those people offered me a job, and I went, wow, I could work in microcomputers, which were still very new and cool then, the #1 Apple dealer in Houston, or I could work on mapping software. So the mapping software gig only lasted 9 months, I think, at most. And then I went to work for the retailer, and that was when I found out that retail is like really difficult. That's what I would say. Retail is very difficult. It's very consuming. So I didn't get to write as many games as I liked while I worked at retail, because they can pretty much eat up every hour in your day and more, even if you're a workaholic. But it was fun being part of the microcomputer kind of revolution. So we got to, like sell games, like out the yin yang. We got to play all the games as they came out, which was kind of fun too.
And so, but didn't you, there was applied computing at some point in the early 80s, right?
Yeah. So after the microcomputer gig in Houston, I got recruited back to College Station, Bryan College Station. I used to, when I was in school, one of my part-time jobs was working for the local microcomputer dealer, right? So I'd go in there and teach for them, and also do some work on the computers, because I have a minor in EE or something, and they thought that was sufficient to swap boards out of computers. And I did, custom software and that kind of stuff too. But I went back, they recruited me. They said, hey, we want you to be president of our little retailer, because we have 2 locations and we're fixing to add 2 more. So I went from, basically being the service manager at Computer Craft, which by then had, when I was there, when I started, they had 4 locations. When I left, they had 26, and we'd just gone public. Wow. So, that was a pretty good ride for 18, 19 months worth of work. So that was kind of fun. And so I had that kind of entrepreneurial bug thing, because I went, oh, cool, I'm crazy. The guy I work for is crazy. I could be crazy like him. But I was wrong. I can't be that crazy.
Okay.
So I came back. We opened up some more, locations, and that was the Atom Bomb Christmas, which you might actually remember. Probably not very many people remember it.
The Atom Bomb Christmas.
Remember the Atom computer?
Oh, Atom. Yeah, of course,
the Atom computer.
Sure.
It basically killed the Apple business that year, when everybody bought those pieces of poop, and then they all died within 3 months. So that's why it's an atom bomb.
I understand.
So that business was in big trouble, and so basically, I ran it for a little while, and got my second in command to take it over, and we started a consulting business, and that consulting business was Applied Computing. Started in '83 or '84. And so long ago, far, far away.
So when did all of this stuff start?
Oh, that started right then.
Yeah.
So we did the first game that we got a contract for. So I was working on a D&D game, kind of like an early Garriott thing, right, to compete with that. And I was actually writing it on the Lisa.
Oh dear God.
In Pascal, no less. Oh boy, that was more or less brain dead. But
yeah.
But again, I was just using it because I had a Lisa and I wanted to do a game. And seeing that the Mac was coming in and all that showed me that there was going to be an opportunity. All those guys who did really great Apple II games really intimidated the crap out of me. Nasir and all those guys who were just making the Apple II do things that no one should have been able to make it do. Kind of made me went, wow, these games are that's awesome. Those guys are geniuses. Bill Budge, geniuses, not kidding around. Smart people, right? And I knew something about doing software, but I wasn't a genius like that. So suddenly the Mac came along, and the Mac was coming, so I had a Lisa, and then you could see the Mac was coming. Suddenly you could write real full-blown big game software, which is very different than doing pedal to the metal, all in assembler kind of software. And so that was very attractive to me. And when we started Applied Computing, my partner Don Gilman and I, we were doing the business gigs to make money, and the game stuff was on the side. We were doing as much game stuff as we could dig up. We were making our own games when we could, and we had our very first gig was with SSI, and we did a port of Shard of Spring, no less, which again is another one of those games that's gone way away. But it was a way to break into the business. So you just at that time it was pretty interesting. You'd go out to California, and you go around all the places that publish software, because they were all in the Bay Area almost exclusively. And you just walk up and knock on the door and go, "Hey, I'd like to do something with you guys." So if you were willing to go up and knock on the door, because you didn't have any email, couldn't email them. If you mailed them, you'd never get an answer back. If you'd faxed them, that was even at the very beginning of faxes. So not everybody had a fax number. So I just went up and knocked on doors, and that was the same way we got the gig to work with Epics, where we did some of those things. And a buddy of ours who wasn't working with us was doing Gato for Spectrum Holobyte. And that's how we got the deal to do Orbiter. Because, you know, we were talking to him all the time because we were both doing Mac stuff. And he just, you know, hey, we're doing it with these guys and they're pretty cool. Okay.
And so what platforms were these for?
Those are Mac.
Those are all Mac titles?
Yeah, those are all Mac titles.
Wow. That's crazy.
So I did like 10 Mac titles across the time I was doing Mac. And I love the Mac, you know. I love the Mac. It was so, you know, it was really fun to program. You know, it had a lot going for it. Loved the interface. You know, could get away without having color like that until it did have color. And, you know, at the time it was pretty cool. But then, you know, kind of the harsh reality shows up, which is you can make 10 times more money doing something else than doing Mac software.
Yeah, that would have been the late 80s when it became
Yeah.
apparent that the Mac was not the future of gaming. Or
Yeah,
at least-
which is
at least
a
not
damn
our
shame.
future.
But that was the late 80s when you finally figured out, oh crap, I can't do this for a living, really.
Oh, man.
Really, really. Well, everybody wanted your Mac game as long as you're doing a PC port, and if you could, a C64 and an Apple II port too. Or an Amiga or an Atari ST port, and done all those things.
The C64s were really challenging. Holy cow.
Yep, I remember. So when I worked for, you know, when we were doing games for Epics, my C64 programmer flaked out on me. So, you know, we were doing a game with 9 ports. You know, one game, 9 ports. So the, you know, the guys over at Epics, they go, you know, we really need this. This is their #1 SKU as far as they're concerned, is C64s. Can you just come out here and stay till it's done? And of course, the C64, this is a 100% assembler game, right? Not one line of basic, all assembler. And the assembly, you know, the time it took to assemble from start to finish was an hour, the game. So you could like fix something, wait an hour, test it. Fix something. So you stack up fixes. You'd fix 10 things and wait an hour and then test them. So I spent a summer at Epics working 20 hours a day, sleeping 4 hours, sleeping and showering in 4, and working 20 hours. And actually, I've never been the same since.
I was going to say, nothing's changed.
No. Before that, I actually slept.
Ah.
After that, you know, if I get 5 hours a night, I'm good to go.
Okay.
Forever. If I can do 4 for maybe 3 months.
Okay. So it sounds like you had a pretty good gig going there. You're working on these games.
Yeah,
you're
we
making
have our own
originals.
business. We're
You
doing
got-
we're doing some originals, some ports. Yeah.
And next thing I know, you're at Kesmai and we're meeting.
Yeah. Well, before that, what happened to our business is, and so the business had morphed from applied computing to a company called Digital Illusions, which is not the same Digital Illusions as today. And so we were strictly game. That's all we did was game stuff. And we did that. I did that for 5 years. So that was the longest kind of single gig I've ever had across my entire career. But it was kind of interesting. At the end of that gig, we were doing work for Epics, for Activision, and a learning company, and a couple other smaller gigs.
I'm not sure how Reader Rabbit fits into your.
Yeah, we did
your-
Reader
your
Rabbit. We
oeuvre,
did the
you know?
Playroom and the backyard and all that.
Oh, those are the ones you guys remember.
Well, they had to suffer through that when they were
gosh.
kids. See, but
I'm gonna go kill myself now.
we did
Thanks a
the
lot, guys.
very first Reader Rabbit, the first one. And
All right, I'm officially.
I wish I'd gotten royalties on that deal. That was, you know, we didn't design it. It was a lady named Leslie Grimm who did the design. But somehow or another, we got hooked up with her. Actually, Brad Frager, if you ever met him, hooked me up with her. But that was, you know, we liked doing that stuff. We did a football game. We did XOR NFL's Challenge, which was kind of cool. So we were just doing all kinds of games. We liked doing Mac games, and when we did, sometimes we'd do Mac games and do the PC ports or these other ports. But at the end of, I want to say 88, yeah, at the end of 88, a couple things happened. I'd signed, you know, we were doing a modern sub simulator for Activision. We had 3 games in progress with Epics, and then we had a couple other things going on.
How many
And
of you are there? How many
at that
people?
time, there were 15.
Okay.
15, 16. Yeah, we had all kinds of crap going on. I mean, at that time, you could still make a game with, you know, maybe 3 to 5 people for a year and a half, right? So it's a totally different world than today. But all of a sudden, Epics goes bankrupt, right? They did the whole little handheld thing that they said. And I was actually there at Epics the day that they did the deal, And they said, don't worry, all the money is separate from the money for the computer game thing. Right. So here's a great lesson. How many people in here have worked for somebody before? Like a big company? Okay. When their lips are moving, they're lying. If you get nothing else out of this entire presentation, when their lips are moving, they're lying. Next. So Epix goes into bankruptcy, which means
school is boring, lips moving, lying. Okay,
yeah.
good.
So, well, school is not boring. School was boring to me at some times.
Good qualification.
I enjoy school.
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. So Epix goes bankrupt, and not only does that mean that all the games that we have going on with them are kaput, it also means that they stiffed us out of our payments for those games that were due, the milestones that were due, and our royalty stream, which was mostly from Epix at that time, goes kaput too, because they put all the products into closeout, which meant that they didn't have to pay royalties. So, you know, we go from actually being not comfortable, but at least not starving, to having nothing. And at this, literally 2 weeks later, Activision, I have a new producer, you know, I'd signed a deal, literally, so this is another one of those wonderful things. I go to Activision, I work on this deal for a sub-simulator, a nuclear sub-simulator to kind of compete with Red Storm Rising from Microprose. And I do, you know, it takes 8 months to do the deal, which is like impossibly long. And so finally we do the deal. I happen to be in California. We walk in, we go, okay, we're ready to sign the deal. We walk in, we sign the deal. And then the producer says, oh, by the way, I'm leaving and I need to introduce you to your new producer. And walks me down the hall to Kelly Flock, who's the new producer, who he will know. And so that lasted about...
You should explain who Kelly Flock is.
No, I shouldn't. We're on camera. But he's a very famous guy in our business. But that lasted maybe maybe 8 weeks after that, because immediately, no, that's not the game we want, even though that's the game in the contract, right? Which is not atypical, so I shouldn't pick on Kelly. It doesn't really matter. When you change producers, you're doomed, is what normally happens, because their vision and whatever was happening before is going to be different.
At the very least, you're starting over, and that's still true today.
Yes.
Not that I would know firsthand.
Or even recently.
Hey.
So that was that game got canceled like a couple of weeks after Epix went bankrupt. So now 3/4 of what we're working on is kaput. You know, kaput, and our royalty flow is kaput, which was kind of our buffer. You know, to get by on was the royalty flow. So my ex-partner Don Gilman, you know, at Applied Computing, is actually at this time working on a game deal, and it's in big trouble. You know, they're having a hard time finishing the game. And, you know, they've had personnel problems, and the scope of the game was bigger than what anybody thought, yada, 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 right? And so, you know, he's been bugging me, oh, can you come help me? Can you come help me? And, of course, I don't want to, you know, it's like a tar baby, right? It's not something you want to touch, because you know, nothing good can come out of this. And so we're kind of desperate, and we go, okay, well, should we work on this game? And the guy who was running the studio then, running that company, which was 360 Pacific, that was Tom Frisina. And he came out and he said, you know, well, we'd love for you guys to work on this game, but what we really should do is just hire you. Because he didn't want to have us as a third-party developer, right? He wanted to hire us. And so we talked about it as a group, because there were, you know, 5 or 6 of us were kind of the key people in the company. And we decided to do that. So we had the rest of our stuff going on kind of phased out, and as it phased out, people moved over into 360, and we became the 360 Pacific studio in College Station, doing Harpoon at the time. And so this was in January of '89, and so we said, well, okay, look, we need 3 weeks to figure out what's going on here, right? So we took 3 weeks, and we came back and we went, well, you know, this is, you know, here's what it is, here's how big it is, here's what the problem is. He says, you have until November. Can you get it done in November? Yes or no? That's how much money we have. You know, I go, if you will make sure that you pay us the whole way, you know, we will get it done. And of course, it took until December 17th to ship it, which meant we finished it before that, but December 17th. But we literally spent a year doing the 7-day-a-week thing, you know, the 16+ hour a day thing, building that game. And literally, when I shipped it, I thought, okay, this is an okay game. It'll do 35,000 copies. That's what I thought when it shipped. And it, you know, it went on, did 500,000 units in the first 2 years, which was big numbers then for a strategy game. But man, that was a bitch. It was probably the second worst crunch I've been on.
Was that the time you got your cattle prod out for the first time? Or?
No, I'll tell you when I got the cattle prod.
Okay, we'll get to the cattle prod.
Yeah, yeah. People started giving me gifts. They give me gifts when I leave because they're happy to see me go, is what I think it is. So that was an exit gift. They didn't want me to use it while I was there, you understand.
I understand.
They wanted to inflict me on the next people. But yeah, that was and I stayed at 360 after the launch, and we did a few expansions. And in April, my boss, Tom Forsina, came down one day, and he'd come down once every couple months and talk to everybody. And he went around and talked to everybody, and while he was there, he fired somebody who worked for me. And I went, what the hell? Well, these other people were complaining about them, so I think I got rid of them. It was like, dude, what are you thinking? I'm not going to do anything today. This was like on a Friday. I said, I'm going to call you on Monday because I need a weekend to think about this, which is very unlike me. Normally, I'm kind of a hothead. So, I spent the weekend thinking about it, and I called him back. I said, I can't work for you anymore. It's just that simple. So, I'll give you 60 days. Let's figure out a transition plan, yada, yada. Try to get you someone here to run the studio because no one here wants to or should be running the studio. And left him on pretty good terms. He still talks to me. I saw him last week, and all I got was a hug. And he didn't even have a knife. So things were awesome. But yeah, it was a good gig. But I was very sick of gaming at that time because it was a big burnout to do the the build of that and the launch of that, because we ran not only the development, we ran the customer service and all that stuff for that game. And did all kinds of everything that wasn't like putting it in the box and selling it to the retailers. We did.
So was it from there to Kesmai? I mean, that doesn't sound like getting out of games
no,
to me.
No.
Oh no, there's more. Okay,
yeah.
I'll be
So at that time, I'd met my future wife, and she lived in Chicago. We both worked at 360, but in different places, right? And so she moved to Chicago, and I went up to visit her, and I said, "Yeah, I'll be here next week." And I went home and I sold the stuff and got in the moving van and drove up there. And she was kind of surprised to see me. She goes, "I'm not sure I ever invited you." She didn't tell me this till a couple years later, but it ended up working out. And when I got to Chicago, there really wasn't much open there, even though there's a lot of gaming going on in town. So, and I was a little bit burned out, and I said, I really want, kind of a more normal job, which is always a mistake. And I actually went to work for an R&D startup doing graphic stuff, meaning early MPEG JPEG. So we take that whole MPEG JPEG thing for granted. This was 1990. We were doing, algorithm work, like going to the MPEG meetings before it was finalized, and and then building chips out of it, building ASICs out of it. So I got to manage a bunch of chip. I started as the Macintosh UI programmer, and I was managing the studio like 5 months later, which was bizarre. But I think I just was the most alpha male there or something.
It kind of keeps happening to you. There's a pattern here.
Yeah, and I don't step backward when they say we're looking for volunteers.
Yeah,
it's a major error. Step backward when they say we're looking for volunteers. Step backward before the guys around you do.
Ignore him. Ignore him.
No, it's true.
No, it's not.
Well, it depends on what you like doing. You get a lot more satisfaction out of the work sometimes.
That's
than
true.
Managing people.
That's true.
So, and I did that only for about 15, 16 months, but it was very interesting. This was a Japanese funded company, so I got to go to Japan a lot, got to learn the Japanese culture. Very fascinating work. Working, those people make chips are smart people. They're like not kidding around smart. In the games business, people are smart, right? The chip people are kind of freaky smart, in the big scheme of things. But I had a great time working there. But I missed doing games. And even there, I was doing a game in my spare time, at night, and I couldn't get enough of it done. Same type of thing. The work was too intensive, too much travel, and too much. That was a 10 or 12-hour a day gig, in the big scheme of things. And so I talked to my boss about it and said, I really miss doing games. This is exciting, but nobody's going to see this stuff for like 3 or 4 years. And at the time, we did games in a year, not in 3 or 4 years like now. So you know, I was really bummed out because, you know, you do all this stuff and you're never going to see it come to fruition, it feels like, when you're working on it. So I went to, you know, I looked around, and it turns out that Konami was hiring at the time. Konami used to be based in Chicago, along with a bunch of other console and coin-op companies. And they hired me to run development for Konami USA. And that was a pretty great time because it was right as the Super Nintendo was coming in, and they were coming off huge successes in Nintendo. So I got some console experience, which was cool. And I enjoyed that.
Okay, so Konami to...
Oh yeah, now you want to know the rest of it.
I do.
So I worked at Konami for a year.
We got to get you up to the present, then we'll take a break.
So the Konami stuff, so Konami's a total Japanese company, right? And at that time, as they were moving into Super Nintendo, they had been huge, right? Huge successes, unbelievable numbers. You know, like 4 million unit sellers on NES, which nobody but Nintendo did. They were the #1 third-party publisher for Nintendo. But they were moving into Super Nintendo, and they weren't seeing the same successes. So they sent, like, right before I started there, they sent like a Japanese guy to run the American company, which is, of course, a total cluster, unbelievably stupid. You see it happen over and over again to this day. Who immediately decided that the company should run just like Japan, you know. And so my only claim to fame there was I worked harder than the Japanese, which intimidated them, which was fortunate. And I got the most things approved of any gaijin in the entire time I was there. Like, my approval ratio for like doing things was higher than anybody else by a factor of 3. And I had a great time there. The other cool experience I got there is the PC division guy quit, and so I got to run the PC division for half the time I was there, which meant I actually got to go out and sell games to retailers, which I'd never done before. Had to be the sales guy too.
Sounds like hell.
Well, it was interesting though. It was kind of hell, but it was interesting because it was something I hadn't done before, and I didn't understand it, so I had to learn it. And it was fascinating to see how they made decisions about games. So I thought of it as a gap in my education.
Throwing bones? What? Rolling dice?
No, they look at the box.
Ah, okay.
That's pretty much it.
Wow.
If they don't like the box, they won't buy your game. It could have gold in it. It doesn't matter. If the box sucks, the game sucks. So that was one of those cherished lessons that you really don't want to learn per se, but you do. So I got recruited out of there by Game Tech, which I cherishly call Game Wreck. Down in Miami, and actually there was a sales lady that they had that I'd met while I was on the road selling, and she recommended me for their development job. And next thing I know, they're like whining and dining you and throwing money and trying to get you down there. Throwing money not in today's sense, but it seemed like they were throwing money at the time. And it was another chance to take a company public because they weren't public and they were looking to go public, which was interesting. And they were doing a lot of development. So Konami was doing a lot of development, but 85% of it was in Japan. Only a small part of it was in the U.S. So mostly, most of our stuff was, oh yeah, you'll take what Japan gives you and you'll like it. Oh no, it's not going to work this way. Well, we're not going to listen to you, right? Because they're Japanese. They know better than we do. And for their own market, they were absolutely correct. And for our market, not always right. So Game Tech was an American company doing American stuff. And it was a great opportunity, and my wife and I said, we went down in Florida in like December.
Oh, Chicago to Florida. Yeah.
And it's like awesome, there's like flowers blooming in December in Florida, and in Chicago, the snow's this high, and I'm freezing my butt off because I'm from Houston, and when you go to Chicago, you freeze your butt off, pretty much. And so Game Tech was a pretty good run. For me, I got to work on over 130 SKUs in a year. Got to do a ton of, start a ton of new development, ship a lot of console and PC product, acquire a lot of stuff. And it was great. We had a very small internal staff. My producers had an average of 15 SKUs that they had to do. And, that would be 5 to 7 titles.
Wait, when was this?
93.
Products were already pretty big then. I mean, they weren't huge.
But we had to feed the machine, right? It's and the EA thing. How many titles are you going to ship? How many SKUs are you shipping this month is the question. Not, are you shipping one this month? We were shipping, on the order of between 6 and 12 things every month.
All external. You were using all external.
We have
developers?
one internal team. One internal team. So, and it was really small. So, it was a great job from an external production standpoint to do that. And you know, we got to the point where we were ready to go public, and I had ethical issues with what we were doing, and I had to leave, which was kind of unfortunate because you know, I don't have much, but I do have a little bit of reputation. I didn't really want to waste it on that. So, and these things happen in our business from time to time. Less now than before, fortunately. And so basically got out of that, started doing, started my own publisher doing something called Alliance Interactive there in Florida, and got the rights to Harpoon and published it. You know, we made literally a million gross sales in 1 year, and then got shafted by the distributors. You know, Abco, if you remember them, shafted me out of about $300,000, and you know, they just don't pay you. You know, you can sue them, but they don't pay you, and that kind of, you know, knocked us down pretty good. And my buddy John Taylor, who I knew from before over at Kesmai, said, "Hey, we just got bought by these crazy Rupert Murdoch guy and at Fox, and they're going to, you know, grow an online business, and we need help because we have this big studio people and they're all slackers." Well, he didn't quite say that, but that's what he meant. But it wasn't really that. They were all really great guys, but they were going from a 10-person development company to a 100-person development company overnight, and doing Windows stuff. They'd only done DOS stuff, yada yada yada.
No, wait, Kesmai was online.
They've been online since '82.
And like I remember Genie and
yeah, they were on
Delphi
Genie and CompuServe,
CompuServe, that's
and
right,
Delphi,
yeah.
and all of that.
Yeah.
You know, and they did great stuff, but it was all non-graphical for the most part, right? And all of it, they were doing MUD stuff for all intents and purposes. And all of a sudden, you know, they got bought by Delphi was the other company that got bought at the same time by Murdoch to build this super duper web portal, you name it. You know, it was one of those stupid crazy .com ideas, right? You know, crazy stuff. But they really wanted to take their online games, make them a lot more graphical games, bring them all to this major web-based service. So all, you know, now internet instead of online services, which is what everybody was doing before. And so they brought me in to do that, and it was a great time. I spent a really nice 4 years there.
Now that was around the time that we met for the first time. I remember it was up in Boston. At the Looking Glass office. Yep. Do you remember why you were there? I can't remember. I just remember we were also like, wow, this is like this is the Kesmai guy. They just got bought by Rupert Murdoch.
For somebody at Fox, who knows what it was.
They're a big deal, and we were all
we were rinky dink.
It didn't seem that way at the time. Okay.
I mean, there were big bucks behind us, and
yeah.
You know, the Fox organization's very impressive.
Yep.
You know, from how they get stuff done. They're vicious in an almost beautiful way.
So, well, how successful were you, and what did you manage to help them grow that?
Oh yeah,
that quickly. And I mean,
we did a lot of titles.
was a pretty hot title back then.
Yeah, we did a lot of stuff, and
can you tell them what Air Warrior was?
Well, Air Warrior was basically a multiplayer flight simulator. You'd fly around in a world with 50 to 100 people flying around with you, doing dogfights, you know, or bombing runs, or getting a Jeep on the ground and shoot your machine gun at the planes as they go over.
It was all graphical.
Yeah,
and at that time
3D.
it was really impressive.
Yeah, but again, it's the idea of it, the sizzle part of this was the fact you were in there with all those people doing stuff like this at a time where most games, they did the online thing so they could put it on the box and less than 5% of the people used it to do head-to-head stuff. So it was very fun. I enjoyed playing Air Warrior a lot. I even got almost semi, I wasn't completely retarded, just kind of retarded playing it, which was really good.
I mean, those are some pretty decent graphics if you look at them.
Yeah.
I mean, check it out.
Which one's that? Is that 3?
Well, Air Warrior 2. And,
yep.
Air Warrior
2 and
3.
Yep. So we did, when I got there, they'd had, so I had published, so here's the thing, I'd published Air Warrior DOS, the Super VGA one, both at Game Tech, and before that at Konami. So, I knew those guys because I'd done their publishing before. And then they were dumb enough to hire me. Isn't that awesome? So I must have not screwed them appropriately, or they never found out. I wasn't a good publisher, obviously. That's what I'm thinking has happened. But yeah, we did several other games. We did several other online games
Like
that you never
BattleTech
heard of.
multiplayer? Did you?
Yeah, multiplayer BattleTech, which
Yeah, that's
eventually
pretty cool.
got killed and everybody went crazy because basically the license, FOSSA got bought by Microsoft, and Microsoft and EA mating as porcupines, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. So publishers have a hard time doing stuff with each other. And we did Alien, we had an Aliens online game, believe it or not.
I remember that one.
I know. It was actually kind of fun. And, a couple of RPG kind of games, that nobody ever remembers. Legends of Kesmai, which hardly anybody played. But the coolest thing that we did there, though, is we were on AOL with a bunch of our games. And with AOL, we saw, that was the first time anybody had seen numbers where we had like 40,000 people in the game, 50,000 people in the games. This is way before, Ultima Online, and somebody actually had hit 100K. Nobody had ever seen that kind of stuff before.
I mean, this was way before that. So why do you think
why
wasn't Kesmai the Ultima Online? I mean, or the EverQuest? Why didn't it quite happen for you?
Well, I think that a couple things. Well, one, Kesmai did talk, back when it was Multima and all that stuff. There was a conversation about it happening there, and that would have been interesting. But I think the thing about Ultima Online is it overreached so far. It reached way further than it could grasp.
In its ambition as a design sense?
Totally.
Okay.
And that, it opened up a possibility space in people's heads that I don't think is filled today. In the big, meaning that, people saw, they were more there for what it could be than what it was.
Sure.
If you get my drift. It was almost, for me, it was as exciting. Working in online was exciting as working in games when microcomputers were brand new. It kind of reinvigorated me, frankly.
But on Ultima Online and EverQuest and all the MMOs and online games that have come after all the Kesmai stuff. I mean, Air Warrior in particular. I mean, I look at this and I'm just thinking, wow. I mean, there have to be more people who are into that kind of stuff than there are into slaying orcs and elves and stuff.
Yeah, but it's like think about our box business. How many, branches of the tree have been pruned off so far by marginal economics? Because you know the problem, right? It's as hard to do one kind of game as it is to do another, and it's expensive. And if the opportunity is not there to make the same money, what happens to that branch of the tree? Snip, snip.
I still think if you did a game right now that let 40,000 people duke it out in the sky over,
yeah, but it would cost you the
Nazi
same as a
Germany.
game where I could do 200,000 people. That's
I think you'd get
harsh
more than
economics of
Oh
this.
my gosh.
What I like about what's going on now is you can do games on different platforms much cheaper, so you can bring the experience without having to do that big, huge outlay of money.
So
That's for the future.
So Kesmai, owned by Rupert Murdoch and Fox, did they just get cold feet and pull the plug on you guys?
Well, they
or
pulled
what
it.
happened?
Well, here's what happened. It's interesting because their big online service got nuked early, like in mid '96, early '97. All of a sudden they went, oh well, this is a really expensive idea that we're trying to do. We're basically going to do something to compete with AOL, and AOL went flat fee. Oh crap! Don't you hate it when that happens? Because it changes the economics of everything. And suddenly, and they were even, so their idea was, well, we should compete with AOL or we should buy them. So later on, they're like kicking themselves that they didn't buy AOL when they could have bought AOL, which is kind of fun to watch from the sidelines. But, they got cold feet on the service, but they went, hey, this little, online game thing, we make money. We aren't like in the, the online game business pre-flat fee was pretty profitable. You could actually make big money even though the volume wasn't very high. And when AOL went flat fee, it changed everything. Everybody had to go flat fee after that. But they were still paying. We'd already done a deal with them based on hourly, so they still had to pay us as if it was hourly, which was awesome because we were making money. All they wanted to do was not have our games stay up so that they would pay us less. And there was a big lawsuit about that. Yeah, I can't talk about that, but I learned a lot about lawsuits while I was there, I will say that. And discovery and all those things that you hope you never learn about. I know all.
Yeah.
And depositions, I know how to be deposed. I hate that stuff.
Been through a couple of those myself. It's not fun.
Yeah. So, but you know, I liked, watching learning stuff from AOL, how they did business, learning about larger scale online stuff. Because anybody who was doing online back in the mid '90s understood that it was something that could potentially change the world. It was that kind of level of play thing. Because the internet, hardly anybody was on the internet then, right? You didn't even have a real browser till late '96 in the big scheme of things. So it was really, really kind of earth-shattering stuff that we knew was going to be consumer. It's not like earth-shattering stuff that, oh yeah, you're going to put it in a product and someday you'll use it and it'll be magic. It was stuff that consumers were going to touch. And that's what, it was very exciting. And so at that point I said, well, I've been doing games for 20 plus years now. Maybe I should spend the rest of my time doing online games. So that's why I decided to do that.
And so why did you have to leave Kesmai to do that? Or did you just want to get back to Texas?
No, actually, I got kind of recruited to be at Origin. So, I heard about the gig, and I went and interviewed for it. And when I interviewed for it, I really wanted it. I really wanted the gig because it was like going to the show, right? If you're in baseball, it's time to go to the show, and that's where the show was then. And plus, I played the game, and I love the game. I love the game,
yeah.
And it's rare that you get to work on something that you really, really love.
So, what was your role at Origin on?
I was VP of Online, which meant I basically owned everything about UO, the entire service, the game, the whole 9 yards.
So trying to wrangle Richard and
Richard didn't
fend
have
off
anything to do
electronic
with UO.
arts.
You know better than that.
So we're on camera now. Remember,
I know.
He's going to be here next week.
Awesome.
What's your story? What's your version of the story?
Well, I wasn't there when it launched, so I don't know about that stuff. But at the time, Richard really wasn't involved with UO when I got there, which was right after Second Age.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't his deal. He had other things going on. He's working on U9 at the time, and doing a lot of travel at that time. He was still doing the, Antarctica, yada 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 stuff. He was doing a lot of kind of high adventure stuff. So I like Richard. Richard's a great guy. I've just never really worked closely with Richard for any length of time.
Yeah. Anyway, so what was your mandate? And was your mandate being sort of handed down by Electronic Arts?
Well, it was interesting. So my mandate being interviewed was one thing. And then I arrived, right? I start the job, and the very first week they bring me in a room and they go, what's your plan to sunset UO? Because we're bringing out UO2 next year. Yeah. When they actually thought they were bringing out UO2 next year.
So yeah, let's set the timeline here. This is right around 2000.
No, this is 1999.
99?
This is early 99, right? So this is early 99. And so I literally show up in my very first week, I think it's like Thursday of my first week. And they pull me into a meeting and they go, yeah, we need a plan to sunset UO. And of course at that time UO was like probably the largest percentage of online psychopaths that I have ever seen in my entire life. Like really crazy people. And
I had to change my phone number and get an unlisted phone number because of some of those people.
Absolutely. So I said, you really aren't serious, are you? Are you really serious? Because if you're serious, I have to quit now. Like today, I will quit. Because I'm not going to be here and get killed when you do that. And I was actually deadly serious, and I think they understood that. I said, you guys will get killed, but I'm not going to be here to be killed. Because that's what would have happened if they'd have killed that game right then and there. Because the people were very, very, very passionate about that game. Extremely passionate. And a fairly substantial, but still very small percentage of them were completely batshit crazy. And I mean, and this happened all the time. We'd ban people and they'd show up and beat up employees in the parking lot type stuff. People get robbed, and Vogel gets a letter in his mailbox saying, I know where your house is too. If you don't care about my house getting robbed in the game. So there was like this, not much of a layer between reality and the game thing going on for again an extremely small but highly vocal group of complete sociopaths. So. I convinced them that not only could we, do the game, but we can make it grow. And EA is nothing if not greedy. So we love money at EA. So, and I had the opportunity, and, was lucky enough to have a team that could work with me we took the game from about 120,000 people when I showed up to right under 250, within about 12 months. So
that's huge.
And that was, and remember, EverQuest launched the month after I got there, which really was a pain in the butt for us. But, we never went down. We always went up. And the more good stuff we did, the further it went up. So really a great game, a great team. Because the people on the team all cared about it. They all were, you do computer games long enough, you're on teams where some of the teams really sing, they really are together, and some teams are just kind of really good. This was a team that really, hit it on all notes. So, and that's pretty rare in our business when you really have a totally passionate team.
And what tune were they singing specifically? I mean, what were you trying
Mostly
to do to
survival,
keep it?
but and
I meant from a design standpoint. What were you trying? What did you do to try to keep the game vital and vibrant?
Well, we
and
mostly
alive
were trying
for
to
players?
fulfill the promises of the game, and fix the kind of huge spurting augury problems, which it had endless numbers of. It felt like, when I came on, my favorite story from the guys who worked on the game before I got there, and they went, yeah, we used to get all these bug reports, and at the end of the week, the ones we couldn't enter, we'd delete. And I go, well, how many would that be? Well, that would be maybe 15,000 emails a week. And I go, well, how many of them did you enter? Oh, we'd get about 200 or 300 of them in before we'd have to hit the delete key, delete all the rest of them. So,
Wow.
There were, the game had serious problems, and it was still fun. And, the game, it's almost like the real PvP going on was the players against us. As we messed with their game. So it was an awesome experience. I wouldn't trade. It's probably my peak experience in the game business overall.
Really?
Yeah.
So you went from Origin, part of Electronic Arts, to Maxis, part of Electronic Arts.
Yep, got
so
recruited
Text again.
Well, at the time, and I should have never let them twist my arm enough to do this, but at the time they just shut down most of Origin except for UO was the only thing left. They killed UO2. I was actually on UO2 for the last 8 weeks of the project. So they put me on UO2. It took me 3-4 weeks to do the assessment. I said, okay, here's where we are and here's where we aren't. Here's what it's going to take to finish it. And they killed it 4 weeks later because it was the wrong answer. And they were doing, same old thing. They had bitten off more than they could chew across all of EA. And I'm not sure I would have made a different decision than them. So I'm not saying that, EA is evil and they do. No, EA is rational, which makes them look evil a lot. So, but they're only rational from a business sense, not from a game. They're not about the art or about the, what they're doing to your head. They're about what they're doing to your wallet when you get down to it. Because that's how they sustain themselves, and that's why they're number one in our business. And they do some great stuff along the way, but it's about the business for them. They're very, very rigorous. And I probably learned more in 4 years of EA than I learned in the previous 10 years working for them. So that's something to be said for.
Did you realize it at the time?
Oh yeah, I knew it at the time.
See, I didn't.
I didn't like all of it,
Yeah.
but I knew it at the time. So a lot of those lessons are ones you go, no, that's not right. But then you look at it and you go, crap, it doesn't feel right, but it probably is right. So, but they recruited me because the Sims Online thing was a complete, it's a story of my life. Oh yeah, we have this really big problem, Gordon, and it really needs fixing. And go, oh, a challenge. So I'm highly motivated by challenges, and that's a huge character flaw in our business, is what I think, because it gets me into all kinds of trouble. So, and for me, it was the reason that they ended up getting me to go, because I never wanted to live in California, ever. The reason they got me to go in the end was because at the time, it was the fulcrum to move MMOs forward. I saw it as an opportunity to move MMOs to a much wider audience if we could pull it off. Now, in the end, we didn't pull it off, but that's the reason that I went there, is I thought that we could pull off something that would bring MMOs to, like the 1 million mark, not for the 1 million, but because we would get more mind share. We would get people into gaming that we would have never got any other way.
This seems like a no-brainer. I mean, and almost impossible to screw up. The Sims
Now, wait a
online.
minute. Game development, impossible to screw up. Game development,
It's
all
The
right, think about your
Sims.
experience for a second.
It's The Sims. It's online. What were the goals of the project as you understood it when you got there to solve all these big problems?
Well, it's EA.
And what did
it's
it
about
end
the
up?
ship date always, isn't it?
So there was a good plan in place. If you'd only had 3 more months, the standard refrain
no,
of the endangered developer.
No. So I think that the challenge was, from the beginning, the project wasn't clear about what it wanted to be. And, my challenge walking in was, first, get the team to be a team, which, there's some challenges around that. And second, to really get with Will and figure out what was a minimum feature set that we thought could win in the market. And that took a while too, because Will's not an online guy. When you get down to it, not, and I love Will, because Will doesn't operate with the rest of us. He's like not in our time-space continuum. He's on a totally different plane of existence, and he is smarter than all of us put together in this room and then some. Which means, when he's looking at you like a bug, that's probably accurate in the big scheme of things. But the thing about, so getting with Will and trying to get that amalgamation between what would make a great online game and what would keep it be The Sims was really interesting, and it took a while. It took it took 4 or 5 months to get there. And then we went to management with it, and we said, look, we think if we have this minimum game, this set of stuff, that we can have a hit that works. And they said, but when can you ship that? Oh, well, we have to ship by this date. So, and we went, well, that's not going to happen. And then we went out, we went ahead and tried to do it, which probably should have stopped right then and there and said, can't get there from here. And we left out some pretty key stuff like the game part and also the custom content part would have been huge for that.
So let me go back to Will for just a second. I mean, when you were working with him, did you find him to be sort of an analytical designer, or is he kind of a
both.
A gut kind of guy?
He does both, really. But he's he has a very analytical mind. But he also is about I think the thing about Will is he likes to experiment on people. So you're aware of his robot stuff, right? Where he does stuff and then watches what happens to people. He's like that with the games too. So, he comes at it from a very different place from the rest of us, and that's why he's very successful at what he does.
And how did that translate into an online design?
Well, I think a lot of the things that Will wanted to do were already proven to be problematic. That might be the best way to put it. Because to Will, the griefing part is the fun part of the game. So in every game Will plays, he is the griefer, and he goes, that's fun, let's do some more of that. But Will, what about the people you're doing it to? Well, they're not really people to him, so it's a problem. It's a problem. So, but again, Will gets that. It's not like he's not dumb. He gets all that stuff. And what Will's about when you get down to it is about having huge possibility spaces to do exploration and discovery. He makes toys more than games when you get down to it, and he's the master at that. But Will agreed. We did come to an agreement on what that feature set should be, and frankly, I didn't believe that they would ship the game until it was ready, because it was too big, it was too important, it was part of the #1 brand at EA, and all the statistics that we had said we shouldn't have shipped it. And we had the statistics, we got all that together. And it's not like we didn't talk to the right people about it at the time. And it's just unfortunate because it's a huge blown opportunity. And you'll see EA kind of take another whack at that sooner or later and get it right. But EA knows more about doing online now than they did then. Because at the time at EA, only really Origin had ever done anything online. And the first thing they did when they did all the other online stuff was not use any of the Origin people. Because, that's Origin. We don't like Origin. Well, we have a lot of smart people. Smart people can do this. And that's another, so all companies have their cultures, and their cultures are both their strengths and their Achilles heels. And EA culture has some Achilles heels at that time that were really harmful to what they could have been doing.
So leaving EA after Sims Online.
Yep. And I wanted to come back to
Austin. I understand completely.
Austin.
And Sony offers another opportunity to continue to grow as a creator of multiplayer games?
Well, I went to Sony because I was working on a new original title. Really, that's why I ended up there. They wanted to do a new title. We talked about what it would be. They agreed to do that, and I went there and I got to start a new team and do a new title. Of course, as usual, you get 1 year into that and they go, oh yeah, our other game's having trouble and we really want you to do this one. Okay, because you just pulled the funding for the one I'm doing anyway, and now we get to work on Star Wars, which at that time was a year out, had been out a year, had challenges. Duh, online game out for a year has challenges. Yeah,
seems like another one that shipped a little too early with
it
too
shipped way
narrow
too
a
early.
feature set.
Shipped way too early, and I can't. The interesting thing about Star Wars Galaxies is they'd been Sony had worked on it for about a year and a quarter with a team in San Diego, and then they hired Vogel and Raff and those guys to do it, and those guys worked on it for 2 years and 9 months, and they threw away everything that had been done before. So nobody else I know could have done a full-blown, sandbox MMO in 2 years and 9 months. And it shipped at least 6 months too early, probably more. In the sense that, they never had time to iterate almost anything, which meant, however the designers believed it was the first time, that's how it went out the door. And, so big parts of it were completely porked in the big scheme of things.
We're missing,
yes.
space flight.
Well, the space flight thing is interesting. So here's the challenge of that. That's literally another whole game.
Sure.
It's another game. It's a game all in itself. And you don't want to know how many millions of dollars it took to do it after they shipped the first game. But it was a sizable double-digit percentage of the cost of the first game to add that, which would have made it at the time, other than Sims Online, the most expensive game ever made, which was, at the time it shipped, the most expensive game ever made.
It's such a core part of the fantasy.
So I've gotten to spend a lot of money so far. That's awesome.
Man.
Come to think of it.
And then Sony, I have no idea what happens inside Sony. It's like a black box mystery to me. And given that the cameras are on, we're probably not going to hear.
Game company, what does that mean?
Yeah, okay.
All right.
And so a couple of years ago, opportunity comes along for Bioware to create an Austin studio.
Yeah, well, I decided to leave Sony when they were going to do the NGE, and I just couldn't buy into it.
The NGE.
Yeah, new game experience. How many people, anybody here play NGE? Okay. So anyway, it was a major game. It was a major change to a existing online game. Basically we're going to say all your persistence, all the stuff you worked for as a customer, we're going to throw that stuff out and give you something new to play.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a very bold, extremely bold idea.
That's one word.
And they had belief that they could get away with that, and I did not. And no one would have been happier if they had been able to get away with it, because if they had been able to, that would have meant my entire worldview was completely wrong, and I would have learned something, and I could have been much meaner to online customers than I ever understood that I could be before. So, and that would have been worth knowing. But I just couldn't buy into it. So, and I wasn't, so there's things I didn't think it was fiduciarily responsible to do that at some level, at the level I play at. So I didn't do it. And so I left there and said, what do I want to do next? And I didn't know. I knew that I didn't want to work for an average game company anymore. I was done with that. Still wanted to work on MMOs, still wanted to do stuff that might change the world at least a little bit, and really advance the medium of what we're working on. And it took about 9 months to really get the whole Bioware thing done. And in the end, there's probably only 3 game companies in the world that we could have worked with, and that was one of those 3. Because we wanted somebody who cared about doing super high quality games, and that's what drove me to Bioware.
So how much interaction is there between the Canadian guys and the Austin studio?
Well, we have about 12 Canadians, including our creative directors from Canada. He's the guy who did, all those games: Baldur's Gate 2, KOTOR, Neverwinter Nights, yada yada yada. So everything but Jade, he basically was the creative lead on. So it's a very smart guy, James Olin. Odd designer though; he's very rational. So
I wouldn't know anything about that.
I know. So, but yeah, that's why he's odd. He's a designer and he's rational too. But yeah, the key thing for Bioware for us was the culture, making sure that we had as much of the culture as possible.
They have a very strong culture, and it seems very strange to me because it's very calm and collective.
They're like
and
polite
cool
and everything. They're Canadian
and low key, and they pay for every meal every day for every employee. I just don't get it.
Not every meal. We have breakfast every morning. We don't bring in lunch every day. So, no, but it's a unique culture, and I think that for us, we went up there and checked it out, and we were more worried about fitting in than anything else because we're kind of wild and crazy Texas type
American cowboys.
Well, there's Edmonton
Canadian
Cowboys too.
Yeah, that's true.
Edmonton is like the cowboy place in Canada.
The one thing about Bioware that I've told this to Ray and Greg, so Ray Music and Greg Zester, who run the place. So I'm happy to say this to the cameras. I wish they would take more risks. They're the best developers in the world. They're exceptionally good at what they do, and they keep themselves in a box where they can just execute really well on well understood ideas. And it drives me nuts that they don't step out of the box.
I think they take some risks. I think the risks don't look that risky in retrospect. I think, but are they like the wild and crazy people that we work with in other places? No, they aren't. They are very. So they are the most rational people I've ever worked for in our particular business.
And that sits well with the Austin development scene and Austin developers and.
I think so. Everybody at our place, they keep pinching themselves, wondering when the crazy pill is going to take effect, and it'll be back to business as usual. So, all those guys, but they are very analytical. So they're creative, but they're also highly analytical and highly methodical about how they do stuff. And I've had to unlearn a lot of how I do business to work with them.
Really?
Oh yeah, it's extremely painful at times.
What kinds of things?
Well, they are methodical. See, in our business, right, wild and crazy stuff happens all the time. You do the deal, you sign it. It might take me 5 months to do something I used to do in a week to get it just right. They are extremely by the numbers, get it right. Don't it's an acceptable risk to have a few loose ends on it. Nope, everything is going to be buttoned up. And that's been a great learning experience for me. So I like working for people I learn stuff from. Even though I don't always enjoy the learning process, I like learning stuff. So.
And is this a reasonable time to get you to say no comment to anything about Electronic Arts acquiring Bioware Pandemic?
No, I think it was inevitable. It's just the timing was a little surprising. They paid a big multiple early, so they didn't have to pay a bigger multiple later, and that kind of was shocking. Yeah. So if I had been the people who own our company, I would have sold too in 2.2 seconds. Because again, the multiple versus the time was right. Sure. And that's a business game, right? Not our game. It's the business game. So now I have to be reassimilated.
Well, and the interesting thing, EA's had a kind of a roller coaster relationship with Austin. We love Austin. We hate Austin. We believe in Austin. We don't.
When was the love
Austin.
part again?
There was a 2-year honeymoon period. Actually,
but you knew that. It was a long time ago.
It was a very long time. It was 1992 to 1994, I believe.
Remember.
I'm not kidding. It really was.
I actually interviewed at Origin in '90.
No way.
Yeah, my girlfriend, soon-to-be wife, had interviewed there with Fred, and I came out at the same time. And if she'd have gone there, I'd have ended up with you guys for sure by hook or crook.
Wow.
I saw little Chris by himself on his computer doing his thing before it shipped. It was very cute.
Yeah.
He was so cute then.
I'm not going there.
Exactly.
Man, so have you? Is this the same old EA, or have you seen some changes?
There's
in
changes going on. So
yeah.
I was out there week before last and talked to a bunch of the people I know there. So EA's a huge company with a entrenched culture.
EA is a very small company, by the way. 120,000 employees.
Yeah. Yeah, most of them are cast members.
That's true. Okay, anyway.
So,
huge company.
Yeah, so they're making changes. They are making changes, but the culture's still there, right?
Forgot about that one.
The culture, the culture's the culture, so it has to be it's hard to move a culture quickly unless you're ready to do really traumatic things. And I think they're trying the gradual approach rather than the traumatic approach. So there's some parts of the EA culture that I'm going to still absolutely despise, and some parts that I think are getting better.
Excellent. Well, on that note, why don't we take a break? It's about 6:15. We'll take about 10 minutes and get back and talk about more philosophical stuff.
And then we'll do questions, maybe? I like interaction.
We can do that.
Awesome.
We can do that. Repeat the question as part of your answer, please.
And doesn't the moderator have to do any work here?
All right, I'll repeat the question. Does not being able to talk about... Oh, sorry. No, go ahead. I'm just giving you a hard time.
Not being able to talk about your games, like, does that bug you, or do you not care about that? Like, I would think if you work on a project for years and not being able to talk about it would be kind of hard.
Does it bother you not to be able to talk about your games?
I think
in development.
At some level it does, because then you have to, like, think about stuff, right? You have to think, oh yeah, I'm not supposed to talk about this. But, you know, there's darn good reasons for it, or we do it, or we, you know, or we wouldn't do it. You know, so I think that it's like one of those necessary but, you know, not exactly pleasant things that you just do in business. In the online business in particular, I do like it more than not. And the main reason for that is, you know, when you're doing stuff that's semi-high profile, the moment you say what you're going to do, expectations never go down. They only go up. And the longer it takes you to build something, the higher they go. So in the case of an online game, if I could, I'd announce 6 months before I launched or 9 months before I launched. So the expectations could only build so far before I launch. Now, I'm sure that we'll end up announcing earlier than that, and expectations will get out of hand. Because basically expectations come from as a consumer, your imagination is much better than our ability to execute. You know, like on 2 orders of magnitude type of scale. So that's a challenge. And then every damn game that comes out between the time you announce and when you ship, nobody understands why you don't have all the cool stuff that they have when you ship. Because mostly it's set in stone way before that happens. And it's really difficult to say, oh yeah, we'll just change the design of our game to add that cool thing that came out 3 months ago before we launched. So I like, you know, on that level, I like the, you know, why don't we talk less about it and do more of it? And then when we have something to show you, we show it to you.
You mentioned earlier that there were 3 companies. That you chose Bioware as sort of one of 3 places you could go. Just out of curiosity, what were the others?
What were the 3 companies you would have considered working for before you selected Bioware?
So just out of curiosity, you mean, what are they? So I think that, you know, when you think about gaming and you think about high quality games, you can answer the question yourself. When it boils down to it, there's very few game companies that have a consistent high quality delivery. And, you know, you could just shout them out from the audience. Shout one and I'll go yay or nay.
No.
Okay, you're done. So do we have to do that for the camera?
Well,
yeah, Blizzard and Valve were the other 2.
It's interesting. Neither one of them does MMOs though. So
well, neither did, and neither, you know, if you think about it. So
it all becomes clear. Okay.
So it wasn't just about that, though. I mean, but anybody who does MMOs before that didn't have a. If they had a reputation for quality, that was the end of it, right? Because you know MMOs take so much effort to make them high quality. You know, it's like saying, oh yeah, let's not make 3 games and make them all high quality. Let's make 10 games and make them all high quality in a row right now to get that MMO done. Because MMOs are just heinously complex to build, and with all those moving parts, the opportunity for error is high, which means, you know, all of them up until really City of Heroes, which was a really clean game because they kept the scope simple. You know, until City of Heroes, we'd never seen a really clean MMO launch because you literally couldn't afford to test them enough to get them there.
So during the break, you were talking about you went to Sony to do an original title before getting sort of moved over to Star Wars Galaxies. And without getting into the details, I understand you don't want to talk about the specific concepts you were exploring, but can you talk at all about the thought process and how you analyzed what might work with the audience in more general terms?
Sure. Well, first thing you do is you say, you know, what I did when I did that. So I did that analysis based on, you know, what could I do that would be new and would possibly work at the level that you need it to work to pay for the development. Because, you know, it's always great if you can find some idiot to give you a lot of money. That's usually helpful. But it's also, you find more idiots if you actually pay back the first idiot and they actually make money. So, you know, investors are hard to come by. You better treat them nicely so you can find other investors. So for what I did then is I said to myself, okay, where are the gaps in the market? You know, where are the things that we've seen work in the past in standalone gaming that aren't being done right now in MMOs, or have been done and been done poorly? And so that was the first part of the gap analysis. And then the second part of that, and there's plenty of gaps in the marketplace when you go look. There's no shortage of gaps. The question is, how big are the audiences for those things, for one, historically? And then two, how big are the audiences currently online for whatever the game might be themed about? Because today it's very different than the world of, you know, 10 years ago even, or 15 years ago, where you really didn't know anything about, you know, your audience might be scattered hither, thither, and yon. They weren't really connected to each other. Now people are connected to each other on the internet, and you can go actually look and see what drives people's interest. And if you're going to make an MMO, you need them to be interested, because they're going to spend their life there. They're not just going to take a little, dabble with a little entertainment there. So I think that's, you know, so the second part of the, you know, first was the gap analysis. What could you possibly do? What interests, you know, not only you, but the team you're going to build around yourself. You know, if the team's not bought into it, you're not going to, you know, you're not going to get anywhere. So we can come up with this super cool idea, you know, let's make a dancing game, you know, for consoles, right? And if all your team are like nerds like us who can't dance, it's a problem, right? Because they, you know, they're not into it, and they're not going to be into it. You know, the harmonics guys, those are a bunch of music guys. Those are not like, oh yeah, we're just a bunch of game guys and decide to make music. They were a bunch of music guys who said we're going to make a game. So you need a team that's going to be passionate about it. And finally, you need to figure out, particularly if you're in online, where's a community, where are the communities that you can co-opt to become your early adopters? And are they cohesive and coherent enough to do stuff with? You know, can you say, oh yeah, look over here, there's, you know, 5,000 people, but they're all really, really serious about this. And over here, here's 50,000 people who aren't so serious, but they're serious enough to spend time and energy on a casual basis in this, about this topic.
Where do you go to do that kind of research? Do you look at what's hot on Yahoo or
well, you can look
MySpace?
Well, think about the web rings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how many sites are out there for, you know, Google is awesome. You know, Yahoo groups, right, is another way. And again, what you're measuring, though, is the very top end of the market. You're not measuring the broad possibility. You're measuring the people who are most committed to a particular theme or topic or, you know, idea that for them is a fantasy that they want to fulfill. Because if you think about an MMORPG, what is it? It's a fantasy that you want to fulfill, that you're willing to do a lot of, not a little bit of. Which is why you see a lot of, you know, medieval fantasy-based MMORPGs. Because in our particular culture, that's a very, very strong fantasy. And I love the people who say it's niche and not mainstream. Because it clearly is mainstream, you know. But, you know, it's been nichified by our implementation, not by the topic.
Do you see MMOs staying PC-centric or moving to consoles?
Will MMOs move to consoles or will they remain PC-centric?
So here's what I think. I think the OS of the future is the web browser. The platform of the future is the web browser. It's not a PC. It's not a console. I think consoles are interesting, and you're going to see MMOs on consoles, but they are a walled garden. You got to pay a toll to get in, you know, and only the people who are inside can experience your content. which means, you know, if you don't have my particular console that I did my MMO for, you know, you're gonna have to buy a console to get in, and then you probably have to buy a membership to get in on top of that. So it's a % of a % kind of issue before you get your first nickel. So I'm sort of thinking that, you know, I have a business on a toll road. So my business is limited by the people who are going to get on the toll road. And that's not ideal. Which means I can't, you know, so I think of it as a business, but it's also an entertainment medium, which means I've just limited my audience pretty dramatically. So if you want to entertain people, which is really what we're up to, and we hopefully get paid for it, it's kind of how we operate, you want to have the biggest possible group of people you can entertain on one side, or you want to have a very clearly identified group of people that you know you can get a lot of them, a lot of that group. You know, if you're in the wrong place, you have a limited group and you can only get a small percentage of them, and then it's kind of, oh, what am I going to tell my next investor that I want to make a game about? Because my track record's not going to be that great if I do that. Does that make sense?
So if the
It's going to happen. I don't think it's the future of, you know, big MMOs are not the future on consoles. You'll see a couple of you know, successful extant examples, and you'll see a lot of trials that are creative successes without being commercial successes.
So, well, if you're really about entertainment, and consoles are where people go specifically and exclusively to be entertained, the cost of the barrier to entry is half of what it is to buy a PC capable of playing World of Warcraft.
I would say, you know, anybody who's talking that way hasn't pulled their head out of a very dark place recently, because if you look closely at the numbers, right, who's going to be the first console to get to 100 million like PS2 had? And what year will that be exactly if that happens? You know, unfortunately the numbers aren't there. The numbers are not there. If PS2 at 100 million plus consoles, right, is the bar, who's going to jump over it next? And the answer is the DS about a year and a half from now.
God, an MMO on the DS, I would kill for that.
But you get my point?
I do, yeah.
Right? So I want to entertain people, and the next thing I do will be on the web, for sure. Because the platform is the browser if you want to reach a lot of people. And it's also the lowest cost of entry way to get into gaming for the producers, for us. So that's where my head is at on this.
Not to beat a dead horse here, but I mean, consoles now have browsers. So are you looking at people getting there any way they can, or is it still PC browsers?
I think the browser is the platform, and it doesn't matter to me. Hey, you know, I got a browser on my phone. You have a browser on your phone, right? It doesn't matter. Yeah. The question is, what kind of experience can I deliver in a browser?
Interesting. Questions?
So among all the companies that are pursuing MMO development right now, what common misconceptions do you see in their efforts about MMO development?
What misconceptions do you see in your competition in the way they're thinking about MMOs?
Well, I think today, you know, every big success begets a lot of imitators in the games business. If you really look closely at the games business, it's mostly a herd mentality scenario where something hits big, 50 competitors spring up in the next 2 years, most of which fail abysmally, just horribly. A few of them iterate that particular genre or medium and, you know, take it up another notch. But the challenge is, once something really good's been done, you can't be 10% better. You have to be 100% better to stand out. And, you know, our business is like Hollywood in one sense, and that is, it probably has never made money and runs on the investment of crazy people to keep it going. Meaning that, you know, net, when you get down to it, when you look at all the money put in versus all the money made, I bet you we've never made money as a business because we're entertainment. And there's always another sucker who will put in money thinking that they're going to hit the jackpot and, you know, come out with a great game. And nobody who starts to make a game, with a very, very few exceptions, starts thinking, I'm going to make a crappy game. They think, I'm going to make the next hit. And 99% of them are completely brain dead wrong about it, right? They go, look, we're making this game again, and it has 2 more classes than the previous game, and we're going to win because of that. You know, or it's got this one little thing, and that one little thing is insufficient to differentiate them or make them better. So I hope that answered your question, but you can try again if I didn't quite cover what you wanted me to cover.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. So I'm very cynical. I'm sorry about this, but I have as much experience as you'll see here on this kind of thing.
That's true. All the way in the back.
So, if you had to start a company from scratch, what would you do differently?
If you had to start a company from scratch today,
Yes.
what would you do differently than you've done in the past?
1, don't do it. Okay, that's one. 2, if you have to do it, which sometimes you have to do it, which is okay. Starting a company is something that some people have to do. Other people's money. OPM is the #1 thing that you need to engrave on your forehead backwards, so when you look in the mirror you'll see it consistently. And you really need to come up with, money to do it. It's money is like the oxygen in that race, and you can't run it without the money. So, or you have to scale your idea back to where you can do it by yourself or with a small team in your spare time. And that means not doing stuff where you're competing with people where, oh yeah, we have 50 people and $5 million and we can compete with you. You can't compete with those people. So don't go where they are, go where they aren't, and do something that you can do. So if you have to do a business, you got to know so much stuff, right? That's a challenge with a business. So when I started, doing my very first real game business, like with other people, I thought, oh, I know how to make games. How hard can this be, right? How hard can this be? It's just business stuff. Anybody can do it. Look at all the dumb people I know who run businesses. Some of those dumb people are very crafty. They may not be smart like we're smart, but they're damn smart about some other stuff that we're not so smart about. So I think that you need to have a lot of skills to run a business. And it's very hard to run a business and do the thing that you really love doing and want to do. So it's almost like you need a partner to run the business who you trust implicitly, who likes business like you like making games to do it, to make it work. And that's a very difficult person to find. Very difficult person to find. You're blessing my knowledge?
I am blessing your knowledge.
Okay.
You are a smart man.
Well, no. I had to do all that the hard way.
You are wise.
I have done all this stuff the hard way. I'm not very smart because my hand has been burned on the stove every single time.
Gordon Walton is a dumb man who has acquired much wisdom through failure over the years. Whatever. Another question? Yeah.
Are there things about online game design that you wish you knew back when you first started to work in that genre?
Is there anything about online games that you don't wish you had known when you started? Oh wait, that wasn't what you asked, was it?
Yeah.
That you wish you had
Is there anything you wish you had known then that you know now?
Sure, I wish I had understood that cooperation was more important than competition. Because as gamers, we're all competitors at some level. That's what we like to do. But the thing that's really sticky in online is cooperation, not competition. And this is because competition runs on a bell curve. Everybody know what a bell curve is since you're all in college? So what that means is that the people at the top 3% of the bell curve are so good that they look like they're cheating to everyone else, which means you suck because you're not in the top 3% of the bell curve. And so that means your audience is automatically going to be limited by that. So if you look at all the super duper shooters out there that everybody thinks are the hottest games going, and then you look at their actual sales numbers, because they have a lot more blow than go in the big scheme of things, one. So first you look at their actual sale numbers. Oh, I would have thought that sold 4 million. No, it sold 750,000. And then you go look at how many people actually play them online all the time, and you go, wow, that game's really big, but there's only 20,000 people online at any point in time. I wonder why that is. That's because those 20,000 people killed the other hundreds of thousands of people over and over again until they quit playing it because the game wasn't fun. And now all those people that they killed talk tough and act like, yeah, I was really good at that game, yada, 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 right? But they're mostly, they're not having a pleasant experience thinking about their experience with that game. So cooperation, usually more important than competition. Plus, when you lose with a team, you can commensurate and strategize and do other things. Whereas if you lose by yourself, you suck. So you really don't want to do that. So that's the number one online lesson I wish I'd known when I started online.
All the way in the back.
I'm interested in your thoughts as to how online games can intersect with like the physical world in the future. So, I mean, right now I feel like what's happening is more, people address the effects of like MMOs. But I'm interested in your thoughts as to how, you see it moving towards like, the physical and the virtual worlds like intersecting, and if you have any thoughts on that at all.
How do you see the physical and the virtual worlds intersecting and coming together in the future in any ways?
Well, I think they already do intersect in a major way. So, one of the guys I used to work with at Kesmai, named Jonathan Barron, used to say something that was very profound, and it says, the human heart doesn't know the difference between the online world and the real world. There's no difference. And in fact, you just see that all the time with people online, that they, the feelings they feel are the same feelings they'd feel in real life. So your heart can't tell the difference. Your head can, but your heart can't. And so I think that there's plenty of intersection already. I do not see like a complete merger where we sit in our chair that, it's got the potty in it and everything else, and we never move from it and we've experienced the full life, right? I don't think that's going to happen. I think, real life has tremendous things that online life can never give us. And I think online life has tremendous things that we can't get in real life without, a combination of luck and opportunity and all kinds of things. We get to do things and experience things that we'll never, are highly unlikely to do in real life. So I think they're just different flavors that allow us to have maybe a kind of a more than human experience of, more than a normal human experience of life, which is why I like them additive together. But I don't, you see some live action stuff going on and things where they intersect. I think that every online game tends to have a fan fest, and the fans want to go there. Very few can go, but all of them want to, because they do want to. Fundamentally, you want to connect with other humans. Even the most antisocial and misanthropic of you wants to connect with other humans at some level, or you're a total sociopath and we need to put you down. But that's another deal. But I think that the thing I like about doing online is it lets us experience part of life that would be difficult or impossible to experience without that. But it doesn't take away from the real life stuff. The real life is where it's at. And I think that the emotional part of the two experiences are congruent. Because I've made friends online, and in the end, you tell people, I've had people tell me things online that they would have never told me in real life. So at some level, some of the online friendships feel even more intimate in the sense of, like mental and emotional intimacy than some of the real life relationships can. And that's what's so powerful about the medium. That's why I work in the medium, frankly, because I don't think we understand it at all. And I think the rules aren't written yet. And that's why it's exciting to me, like microcomputer gaming was exciting to me in the beginning. Because the rules weren't written yet. We didn't even know what we could and couldn't do yet. We know some stuff today, but we really don't know anything when you get down to it in online. Follow-up.
A follow-up.
Do you see, like, for example, something like GPS, where you are in the physical world having any bearing on, your virtual avatar in a MMO, for example?
Sorry. I was thinking about how I would answer that. Do you see something like GPS affecting, where you are in the real world affecting where an avatar might be in the virtual world?
I think for a small class of games, there's something interesting there. But I think, again, you may not understand one of the most compelling parts of this online experience, and that is that you aren't tied to physical reality. You aren't tied to it. You have some level of anonymity. If we got rid of 100% of the anonymity in online gaming, it would be completely different than it is today. And it would shut down a huge possibility space that exists. Because part of what makes people really get into this is that suddenly all the constraints that they have, what they look like, what color they are, where they came from, how all that is cast aside, and the content of your communication becomes your character. That's literally it. The PvP part, the player skill part, is how you communicate and act in the world. So you can be a total jerk for one group of people and a total saint to another. And you can role play both those. We see all the statistics, right? A whole bunch of men play women because they get to have that experience. And if they got caught, that wouldn't be so great for them, right? But all of us have things that we want to express that real life, prevents us from doing. And online lets us, even if it's on a very small way, try things out. And that's the true power of the medium. The games are just organizing metaphors for people to do some of that stuff with.
So let me ask you a question then.
I'm freaking you out.
No,
That's
no,
good.
no. I'm just, I learn something every week in this class. I love it. I don't know if you guys are learning a thing, but I learn something every week. So I know I've always tried in my games not just to tell a story. The story is just a context for action, right? But to let players try on different hats and try on different behaviors and test themselves against challenges however they want and all that stuff. And I've always kind of thought that one of the failings of MMOs is that they don't provide a strong enough story context to make my actions meaningful. But everything you're saying tonight says I might be completely wrong, and that story really isn't. I mean, who cares about story in the context of all the emotional impact, the anonymity and the freedom it gives us, the cooperation among friends, all that stuff. Story has nothing to do with that. Have I been wrong? I mean, I know nothing about your project, and I'm not trying to get you to say anything, but it's Bioware. You know they got to be going after story in MMOs. I mean, you got to be doing that, right? Is that a blind alley? I mean, why do it in the context of everything you're saying tonight?
Well, I mean, people are storytelling creatures. There's no doubt about that. And, story is the medium, is our medium of exchange for ideas, emotions, many things. It's a method of learning. So I'll step it back into learning before I step back into that. So I think every game teaches, whether consciously, unconsciously, whatever. And our, prejudices and, our ideas are what we teach. So even when I made simulators with zero story, I thought, my games had something to say to people if they played them. And, different people would get different lessons from them depending on where they landed in that experience, how far they got in it and how they took it. So in the MMOs that have come mostly to now, right, it really has been about, it's a context for people to socialize in, right? And that's been the part that worked. So all these games that are of less than ideal quality have had devoted followings, and this has been going on for more than 20 years. So back when they were all text and we had to imagine everything, right? Devoted followings, not so much because of the quality of the content, but because of the quality of the experience for people. Most of which was here and not there, right? So in fact, I've been the anti-story curmudgeon for quite some time, and
I'm still hearing it tonight
from 10 years. Well, but I'm talking about what exists, not what might be. Right? So what might be is different. That would be a different experience than what we're talking about. So I think that, with the games that have come, the story has rarely been central, with a few flashes of brilliance along the way to make it central, but rarely has it been the central part of the thing. And basically the player interaction, the player bonds had to hold the thing together more than anything else, because the game certainly couldn't over the long haul, and it certainly, whenever there was a bad part in the game, it was the players together overcoming they're playing against the game to get through it rather than being entertained, right? Do I think there's room for an experience that could entertain and touch you differently? Absolutely. And I hope we're working on that. I hope so. And there's no better person than a total player-driven story person to be the maybe the person to make sure that it's really going to get over the top.
Okay. Yeah.
After working with all these companies on online games, do you think that companies aren't taking enough risks in pushing the genre forward, or do you think it's more of a constraints by the medium?
Do you think the companies making online games in particular are just not taking enough risks, or are there constraints that the medium imposes that are holding us back?
Well, I think both are true. So it's very difficult in a high cost, a super high cost medium to take crazy risk. That's the starting point. So when you think about, are they not doing enough stuff? Well, it's hard for them to do that stuff, which is kind of, so that seems like smart thinking until you start to think to be a must-play experience, like to be a mega hit, you have to be doing something that nobody's done, or that nobody's done like that, so that you have to play it. If you really want to be a mega hit, you got to take a lot of risk at some level. You have to really do something that looks crazy until you pull it off. Because if it was totally obvious, somebody's already done it, pretty much. The non-obvious stuff looks crazy until you actually pull it off. So it's one of the strange things about our business. In our business, to actually win big, you have to actually take risks. And the vast majority in our products that we do don't look risky. They kind of talk themselves up into that they're taking a risk. Oh, we added 2 things to this genre. We're being risky. But in the real world, they're not being risky at all. They're being highly incremental and probably not enough to get above the noise and let people get excited about you. So so again, we're talking about MMOs. Now you go over to Asia, and suddenly you have 3,000 teams building games, chasing the same customers with the same exact game. And people go, oh crap, we really are Me Too. What are we going to do? And suddenly that drives that Darwinian. I was just in Korea last week at the G-Star speaking there. And the thing I love about Korea, and this is terrible for them, right? That they have all this competition and most of those people are going to fail miserably, but that superheated competition is driving innovation in a way that we're not going to see here. We're just not going to see it. There's no overriding reason for people to be super innovative here, because being super innovative means 9 times out of 10 you're going to fail. Not just fail, you're going to fail spectacularly. You're going to look like the stupidest people on the planet if you really take those big risks. But that kind of risk is what really drives innovation. So this is not the right medium for risk. Long development cycle, high dollar. When you talk about, again, AAA MMO delivered in a box in our world, is not the place to drive risk. The risks are going to be taken on the browser with a small game that can be built by 3 to 5 people. That's where you're going to see the risk taken. And any good risk there that pays out may end up getting translated up, but it'll take years from the time you see it until you can get it on a big platform.
Where do you see those small teams taking those big risks coming from? And how do you see them getting their work out to the public? I guess the browser is the answer for you.
Well, you're seeing the non-super risky people doing well on the browser already, right? Whether it's Club Penguin or the guys who did RuneScape, didn't do badly either, considering they had less than 10 people and the kind of money they rake in. Their ROI is higher than ours in the big scheme of things. So it sounds like dumb people make big games when you start thinking about it.
I've had this argument with somebody actually in this room who I will not name, Alan Varney, but many times, and it still seems like bottle lightning to me. I mean, there are thousands of groups of 10 people like that doing that.
There really aren't that many of them, who are seriously doing it. So I think that's where you're going to see. Again, it is almost throwing spaghetti against the wall and seeing what sticks. You need to throw a lot of spaghetti, right? Mm-hmm. And if you're only doing, so the thing that's wrong with MMOs when you get down to it is long iteration cycles and high capital cost. So it's not an innovation place. When you do when an innovation works, it's going to be unusual because very few people are going to do them, which means not very many of them are going to get out there, and most of them are going to fail. Most innovations fail. And that, all creative industries are like this, in fact. There's the people who do the rote, the people who do the rote with a twist, and then every once in a while somebody does something completely crazy that works, but there were probably 100 crazy things that didn't work that you didn't see because they really failed spectacularly smallly before you could ever see them.
So do you think universities have a place in fixing that? Because I look at what USC is doing. I mean, Tracy Fullerton at USC has worked with the folks who did Flow and Cloud and the passively multiplayer online game that Justin Hall is doing. I mean, that seems like a little creativity and innovation incubator. Are the universities a place where that kind of thing can happen? Because I just don't see where it can happen in any structured sort of way.
Well, I think it's
outside of that.
Innovation's totally driven by the leadership more than anything else. So university does not equate to creativity, right? The part it equates to is maybe you have some shelter from the economic harshness of the world, but that does not equate creativity. It's a necessary but insufficient condition for getting. So, are there 3 programs in the country that are fostering creativity in games right now? Maybe.
Sounds like about the right number. Maybe.
Right. So it is lightning in a bottle, and I think it's totally driven by the leadership and the context they create to allow that to happen. And I think that's the same in any creative endeavor, not just ours.
And do you think there's a sufficient? Sorry, I'll get back to questions from the class in a minute.
Now he's interested. Damn.
Is there a? I keep coming back to I guess there's Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation has their online downloadable content place and all that. I mean,
lower cost of entry drives more innovation. It's good. I like it.
Yeah, I'm just. Are we at the point now where we have our not our secondary but our indie scene? Is it here now? And I've been waiting years for that. In the way that
it's always been there. It's now easier to find it because it's better connected.
Okay.
Right, and I think again it's about how can you be creative without having how can you garage band in our business, and that means working on the right stuff. I mean, because the most expensive rock band you could think of basically has the same equipment and the same amount of time and the same amount of energy. It's all about the creativity and whether or not you have access to distribution to the right audience, right? So the cost of entry there is moderately low. Yeah, you have to, every person in the band has to have studied, has to have the right level of skill to get there. But that's our business. There's a ton of programmers. How many of them can make it in the games business, right? Without running screaming from the building, and rightly so.
Yeah, really.
So I think that, if you want to drive innovation, you have to lower the cost of entry and have the right environment for it. Both. And whether that environment is a super harsh Darwinian environment of Korea for MMOs, or it's an academic environment with the right leadership that says we celebrate the creativity and we want to see a lot of spectacular failures to get those gems out of there. That's the things that count.
So are you, and by you I mean like Bioware, Pandemic, maybe even EA, who knows. Do you actually pay attention to that sort of bubbling indie scene, that undercurrent of creativity and stuff to find talent? I mean, where do you go to find talent? When you're recruiting, where do you go?
Well, it depends on the gig, right? It depends on what I'm working on.
Mm-hmm.
On this gig, I went for deep experience, across the board, because I didn't want to, this wasn't a teaching gig. This was an execution gig, right? And, when the bet's big, you gotta stack the deck in your favor because plenty of stuff's going to go wrong, right? There's no shortage of problems. And so this was a luxury in that, I could do it the way I'd like to do it. If I was doing something more innovative, I'd be doing something completely different. And I would be looking, for the indie talent that's looking to get discovered and wants to, step up a level of play. So it just depends on what the gig is.
So is there, where would you have to be to attract the attention of Gordon Walton? Where would you know, where do you forget about the current gig? I mean,
No, forget about the current.
yeah, forget about
Okay,
that. Forget about
the
that.
context is everything.
Okay, well, put yourself in a different context.
Okay, what context are you putting me in?
I'm putting you
What's the
in.
next deal?
I'm putting you in. You're looking for that bright young talent. You know, where do they have to be to attract your notice?
So, let me do a hypothetical for you so I can give myself the right context.
Okay.
The hypothetical is, I've decided that web browser games are the thing to do, right? And I want to do online games. I want to do MMO online games. So, and I don't want to do one, I want to do 10. I want to do 10 at once. And the reason I want to do 10 at once is because maybe all 10 of them will fail. And I'm only interested in doing games that fit one of two criteria. Either they attack a market that nobody is after, that nobody goes after, there's no games for it, or it's doing gameplay we've never seen before. Or never seen before in the current context. Because a lot of stuff got done that's been trimmed off the tree a long time ago. So, I mean, that in 84 and 85 and 87, in that range, there were all kinds of things being done that you can't buy a game like that now anymore because they're not big enough to buy a game like that anymore. So I would first I'd look for people who were I'd look for the garage bands who were showing some talent, who were doing stuff that was out of the box. And I'd find out if they were one-song Johnnies or one-note Johnnies. You know, is that the song they're going to sing till the end? And what comes to mind? Battle. What is it? Derek Smart. You know, are you going to do the same game for the rest of your career or not? Battle Cruiser
Yes.
3000, which I turned down at Game Tech in 1992.
Dr. Smart, PhD.
Yeah, don't forget. But yeah, are they really creative, or are they really trying to get that thing out of their head, one thing out of their head? And I'd want to give creative people then a chance to say, all right, so that's the one you did. What's the one you didn't do? You know, and I'd be looking for one of those two things. Either you're going to go make a game for a market I've never heard of, and think would be totally crazy under the real commercial game thing, or you're going to tell me about some gameplay I've never seen before. You know, that just sounds completely nuts until you execute it. And that's what I would be looking for is a garage band either already doing that and wants to do version 2 of it, or that I just think what they're doing is stunningly original, not for MMOs, but I want them to try to come and do something. And then I give them, here's 5 markets. Which one of those could you do a game for? I would actually take a chance on somebody who doesn't know anything about making games if they knew the market well enough to find out what would really float people's boats in that market.
Okay. I could keep going here, but let's see if there are any more. Yeah.
Just to address your metaphor slightly, because I thought it was kind of interesting, the whole garage band thing as a metaphor for indie game development. Specifically in regards to how you were talking about Xbox Live Arcade, to bring back the metaphor, that would be like having every indie group out there have to pass their record through BMI to get them distributed.
That's true.
As to the question, why aren't MMOs innovation spaces? Like you talked about the disadvantages within the MMO genre, but I'm thinking about it and I'm like, we're talking about MMOs here. They have long lives, devoted player bases, huge content areas. Why can't you slip in small innovation over time, see how it sits, and then keep changing your game?
Can you introduce small? Why can't you introduce small innovations or big innovations, frankly, in the context of a game that has a large dedicated audience, like an MMO? Why aren't they innovation spaces? Uh-oh, you made him stop and think.
Nope.
Oh, no, he's not thinking. Okay.
I'm trying to put it in the right way without cursing.
You wouldn't be the first person to curse here.
Oh, no, but that's okay. I try to challenge myself every once in a while to not do it, and this is one of my challenge days. So I would say here is the number one, and again, it's one of those counterintuitive things. All game players believe that they love innovation. And what they really like is comfort food. They want to be comfortable. They want something that titillates them with some innovation, but they really don't want raw, massive innovation at all. And the challenge, particularly with an online game, and a massively multiplayer online game in particular, is you're dealing with a connected audience. So the audience can all talk to each other. That's kind of what you set up. You didn't set them up to be entertained by you and not know anybody else in the audience. You set it up to where the audience is all talking to each other. So, and the audience, unfortunately, is not dumb, which is, another challenge. In that, so if you're messing around and saying, wouldn't it be cool if, that's the starting words for, the slippery slope words for many a thing that happens in the games business. Wouldn't it be cool if we did this cool, innovative thing? And the likelihood that more than 5% of the audience likes it is effectively zero. And every once in a while that's wrong, right? But mostly it's like 99% chance it'll attract less than 10% of the audience. The other 90% of the audience goes, we know it's a zero-sum game. We know you can only do so much work to this game. You did that for them and you screwed me. It's the first thing they think. So how many of you guys have played an MMO? Who's never had that thought? Okay, so, they nerfed my class, they did something cool for this other class, but what did I get? I got bupkis, right?
Paladins are still screwed.
So whatever. The other thing that you run the risk of is, what if something in there is like really cool? It makes all the rest of the game look like crap, right? So it's the incongruity. It's most games, and there's very few companies who don't do this, but most games are actually Frankenstein monsters. They're stitched together and you can see the seams.
Oh, he's revealing all the deepest, darkest secrets now.
You can see, oh yeah, they sewed the head on. Oh look, they sewed the arm on there. I see the stitches. In fact, they're pulling apart already, right? They're not seamless. They are not one whole vision to where you can immerse yourself completely in them. All those things are immersion breaking. So an innovation plopped in the middle of a context may actually point out the flaws in everything else. This is a terrible thing to hear, isn't it?
I'm getting depressed just listening to it.
So at some level, a uniformity of stuff is better than a non-uniformity of stuff. So, or in the case of an MMO, you almost have to make everything better at once to not get that harmonic dissonance that something really cool can create. And in fact, your audience, what you find over and over again is, while the audience cries for innovation, if you give it to them, most of them will be put off by it because you've just now changed their comfort zone. Whatever they were getting their endorphins from doing, you've just changed that pattern. You're actually changing their play pattern. So it's a risk thing again. So you do that, and again, it's risky, which means 9 times out of 10, they'll hate it and hate you for it. So it's an interesting challenge as a creative person to say, how are we going to make this better without alienating the audience we have? And the way to do that is probably make another game. And put that stuff in it and try to bring another creation to market that can encompass all the ideas you have. An MMO is a platform, but it is not a platform to experiment on your customers with. It's not a market research platform. If in the early days when I went doing MMOs, I was always trying to figure out, how can I do masochist online? Because I've got the sadist. They work for me and they're really easy to find online. I need the masochists to all be together because we could extract a lot of money from those people. But I've never been able to find masochist online, and I keep looking. He wants to do a
Holy
follow-up.
cow, there are like 5 questions.
Well, let's see what happens when you bring this stuff up.
All right, one more for you, and then we'll go around.
All right. I see what you're saying, and I'm kind of tempted to ask for an example, because I see companies evolving more in the direction maybe of what I'm talking about. Where Google sets the best precedent, of course, with the persistent beta, and World of Warcraft did the same thing, right? Introduce a big load of content on your player base. Say, hey, we're in beta, and give yourself a long time to work out stuff that's maybe a little innovative, but you can get people used to. And they have beta servers, they have trial servers where they can try things out and get the player base used to it. Do you maybe have some examples where you introduced something that was really good and it made everything else in one of your previous games look kind of junky? I'm just kind of curious.
So I heard two questions there. One is the persistent beta or the beta server one way to address the problems of introducing something innovative into the middle of something that people already love? Mm-hmm. And then the second question was, do you have any examples? That's always the tough question, in a setting like this.
Well, in the context of the first question, both Google, which is perpetually in beta, and World of Warcraft were mentioned. So World of Warcraft came out in beta, did a long beta, tried stuff out. Seen them do that since they launched? No. Yes, do they have beta servers? Every MMO has beta servers. Who cares, right? But they all put stuff up to try it and to tune it and to test it, right? But you're not seeing like you're not going to see huge game-changing stuff, and you're never going to see World of Warcraft or any other box-delivered game ship you a beta. They do the betas to get the quality to the right level, they hope. So I think that pre-launch is different than post-launch. Once you're a brand, you're set in stone. And that's what we were talking about, is innovating on top of a existing MMO platform, which is a wonderful place to do it, right? You have all these customers, you have all the tools, you can do some cool stuff. As for examples, they were essentially legion in UO. I can't count the times we got bitch slapped for giving people something that pissed off other people out the yin yang. And of course, maybe half of those problems were, we introduced something cool and we also introduced some really cool bugs, which made everybody hate us more. For not only did we change the game, we changed the game for the worse for some people, while we were changing it for the better for others. But in the end, what they really were disturbed by, on any game that's quality level is not up to par, what they hate is that you're spending time on stuff that's not making their personal game experience better. That's what it boils down to. If what you're doing is an innovation that solves problems for everybody, you see mostly positive feedback. If it's an innovation that doesn't solve stuff for everybody, so I'll use an example from UO. We put in what we call the Power Hour at one point in UO, because UO was a game that was limited by the fact that the average player played it 20 plus hours a week. Average, not the normal player, just the average, raw average. So that included the people who logged in and quit that week, for 2 minutes, right? And it also included the people who were playing it 60 hours a week, right? So crazy people were playing it a lot. And the reason they were playing it was the game was set up that way. You couldn't advance without the play. So we put in a thing that said, just, the first hour you play every day, you get double the experience. Now, 90% of the people in the end liked it. In the beginning, a bunch of people complained about it because they went, crap, now I feel pressured to play, extra good in the first hour. Oh my God, I used to be able to count on the fact that it was going to be very slow and methodical. And now suddenly, this time really counts. I have to make sure it works for me, and there's pressure. Not the pressure of staying on 20 hours a week, but the pressure of actually using that hour well. So we got the hate, even though it was something that really made life much better for people, cut the average hours to 12 in the space of a month. Wow. And people didn't slow down their advancement at all, right? So the advancement curves were the same, with people not having to feel like the game was work as much, which was the goal, admirable goal, and people still hated it. So I just, maybe I'm just used to getting whacked no matter what. But I think it's very difficult to introduce. If the innovation is so cool, why didn't you ship it in the first place? Is kind of what it boils down to. And when you don't, you are changing the gameplay style, almost certainly, of somebody for the worse in their mind, not in your mind, but in their mind. So I think that innovations do occur in MMOs, and some of them are really good, but it's not a place for radical innovation. Because then you're really saying, oh, and it's not just what you have, it's what you've learned to do. So I invalidate what you've learned to do potentially by giving you a gameplay innovation, unless it's totally additive. And if it's totally additive, did it totally add to everybody? And does that change my idea of the game that I'm in, or the idea of what I'm trying to accomplish? So there's this weird sociological, psychological stuff that's very emergent and very difficult to kind of predetermine ahead of time. So you're like, there be dragons there when you go there. And I think it's very cool. Again, that's why I like MMOs. We don't understand any of that stuff. We find out by doing, and most of that is touching the stove, not the good stuff.
Let me ask you a left field question. This is I've been listening to you now for a long time.
But I'm a very positive person.
No. This is all great. And I've heard you sort of at least indirectly touch on psychology, sociology, economics,
yep,
marketing.
Yep.
If you're talking to someone who wants to get into the game business, what do they need to know? I mean, do they need to know all that stuff?
No, they got to know.
You just need to be a great programmer, or what?
So today, if I was going to get in the games business, first I'd have whatever my core skill and passion is. Be great at that. I mean, having talent and being really good at what you do is an ante up. It's an ante into the business, nothing more than that. Because guess what? Everybody in the business is really talented and really good at what they do, or they can't get in and stay in to start with. So you got to have that. You have to have a base to work from. For all the people who are new trying to get in the business, I would try to learn enough of a second skill that's useful in the game business to be able to speak the language of that. So if you're a programmer, learn something about art or sound or production to where you can at least converse at the same level with the person who does that. Because then you're in a position to translate between disciplines, which makes you more valuable. And you'll never get the job based on that, but you'll keep the job and advance based on that. Being able to say, oh, yeah, because most of the people who are really good at what they do believe that the rest of the world revolves around them and everything else that happens on the game is less important than what they do. And that arrogance is highly detrimental to a successful game career. Because games are ensemble performances. It's like being in an orchestra. Your solo is awesome, but without the rest of what's going on, the thing isn't going to stand up and be awesome for everybody else. And in fact, your poor performance can bring down the whole thing in a second, in a heartbeat. So you got to have a great skill at whatever you're passionate about. And I would say try to work with do your own game project with somebody who you don't speak their language. Don't make all programmer art if you're a programmer. Get an artist. Get to know that artist. Understand how they communicate. That's hugely useful. And again, whether it's sound, art, production, it doesn't really matter which skill. The idea is to understand that what you do is important, but it's necessary and insufficient to creating a great game.
Taking notes, sorry. Anybody got another question while I take notes? Go.
In terms of the playing of these online games, you talked, people talk about World of Warcraft being the new golf in terms of businessmen kind of maintaining social relationships. And other people talk about it as
it's true.
The corner pub. And Raph Koster has talked about the act of grinding in a game as whittling. And do you have ways you think about the social aspects of these games, some sort of metaphor that you find useful for understanding it? Is it a corner pub? How do you think of the way most people experience these online games?
That's a great question. How are you gonna paraphrase that?
What is your metaphor for thinking about the social interactions that take place in an MMO? Corner pub, golf game. I'm stumped after that. Go ahead.
So I'm gonna wander my way to this answer because I don't have a single metaphor. So the wander that I will take to this answer is, so everyone here lives somewhere. Okay, how many of you know your neighbors on either side of you and at every corner of the compass? Is there anyone in the room who actually knows the first names of the people who live at the 8 corners of the compass from your house? Okay, so one person in a room of 30. So this is highly anomalous to the human condition of the last several eons. In other words, this is completely foreign to what humans are. Humans are social animals, and we live in a disconnected world, a completely disconnected world from a sense of who humans are. when you get back to just, where do we come from and what are we? The vast majority of us lived in a tribe or a village for our entire lives around the same people, from the cradle to the grave, with extremely strong social bonds. It would be unthinkable not to know the names of the people that live directly around you to even today the vast number of humanity in the world. So our environment is so alien, and it's actually, we're fighting with ourselves all the time because we're literally in a crippled state from what humans are supposed to be. You know what online games are? Online games are a salve against that wound. That's all they are. Why are these online, why do you hear all these the pseudo-crazy stuff about people forming these relationships online? They're desperate for something they don't have. And they don't even know what it is, right? They don't even know that that's unusual. Because all of us grew up in that circumstances, right? Now, when I was a kid, I knew all my neighbors. But as soon as I became an adult, I watched TV. I watched the news. I knew all those people were crazy. You can't borrow sugar from them. You'll get involved in their marital problems. The serial killer lives next door. Yada, yada, yada. You don't think the news doesn't condition you into you becoming an alienated human? So yeah, we have the relationships at work. We have them in some of our school stuff that we do. We might have them at church if we're religious, right? But we don't have anything like what humans are used to having today in the Western societies. And in fact, 90% of the people in the world, if thrust into our circumstance, would feel sorry for us at some level. And I think what online games give you is they give you some taste of the potential to have relationships, more relationships than you have now, without your context, without the total context that you carry with you. And because it feels safe, you don't feel like weirded out about doing it. So do I know the names of all my neighbors? No, I do not. I don't want to know those people. I'm very well conditioned, right? Those people kind of freak me out. I don't want them in my life, and I don't want to be in their life. It's kind of how I feel about them. But I didn't come that way. I became that way over time. And it's all about our conditioning within our society, from my point of view. And that's why I think this medium is so powerful, because it allows us to have something that we, for whatever reason, don't have now.
Who hasn't asked a question? You haven't asked a question.
If it's our Western culture that's kind of driving that non-need to know our neighbors, you said the largest market for MMOs is in Korea. Is that the same case there, or why is it there that market is springing up so big if that's not Western culture?
If Western culture is responsible for the sort of isolation that MMOs can help get around, why is the Korean MMO market so very large?
So large. So what I should say about Korea is it's the most advanced online market in the world. It's not necessarily the largest online market in the world, but it's definitely the most advanced. A larger percentage of people in Korea play online games than any other place in the world that I'm aware of, as a percent of total. So Korea has 45 million people, give or take a few. And there are more than one online game who've had 15 million plus people register for it. And in Korea, when you register for an online game, you use, in effect, what would be here your social security number. So, it's not like you were registered, you and your 5 million friends registered for 3 accounts. It's really 15 million people kind of numbers. So that's interesting that market has evolved to that point. You can't relate Asia and the West to each other at all. If you haven't read The Geography of Thought and you're interested in all about this kind of thing, read The Geography of Thought. Basically you think based on your culture. The way you think. All people don't think the same. Your culture has a huge effect on you. And if you played any Korean games, you may look at them and go, what's the point? They're very different, and a lot of them are made to be played in a context that's actually more like a LAN party. than the way we play them, which is, you know, in a dark room by ourselves. You know, that's how Americans play games. That's not how Asians play games for the most part, even though there's a lot of people who do play them that way in Asia. But that's not the starting point for them. The starting point for most of them is in a game room with a lot of other people. They're friends. They're real life friends playing those games. So there is some analogy, but not a direct one, not like we have here.
All the way back there.
So, kind of along that theme, I'm curious, what's different about that market where you can have hundreds or thousands of innovations coming out in the MMO space? Is it a shared platform, so you just innovate on top of it? I mean, MMOs cost so much money here. Are they just taking lots of risks over there with lots of money and flushing it, or what about that environment allows you to iterate so much in the MMO space?
What about the environment in Korea allows them to have thousands of people creating, or thousands of groups creating innovative titles in the MMO space?
Well, so again, I think nobody set out to do great innovative titles in Korea. What happened was Lineage took off like crazy, made a ton of money. Everybody said to themselves, hey, I got 5 friends who are programmers, let's make a game. Next thing you know, there's a whole bunch of games all competing with each other in a super hyper competitive arena. You know, the microtransaction model came out of the fact that they figured out that only, you know, 3 to 5 games could command a subscription. People aren't going to pay a subscription. So it was either go broke trying to get a subscription or do an innovation to come up to see if you can. If we get a lot of people to play the game, what if we could get 10% of them to pay us a microtransaction? You know, now can we do what can we learn and how fast can we learn about how to get people to do microtransactions more? So that in the end, the people who do pay for microtransactions might pay more than a subscription. But again, it's a smaller percentage. And all the other people are content for the people who are paying for the microtransactions. So that's the cool thing about MMOs is the customers are content, and you should treat them that way.
Oh my God.
You know, the more of them you have, the more interesting the game. So what really drove this was the desperation of everybody going broke. So suddenly they said, damn, you know, I have another Asian RPG, fantasy RPG. I better do something different. You know, I'll try a basketball game, I'll try a tank game, I'll try this, I'll try that. Some of that stuff sticks and we hear about it, and a whole bunch of it doesn't and fails.
Are they more low budget then?
Yeah, they are more low budget. A lot of them are 2D, you know, or 2.5D, because the system specs are lower. You know, and in fact, you know, there's less issues about everybody ripping off code from each other too, which is so IP restrictions are flaunted more than they are here, particularly in China. I mean, Korea's not too bad, but again, it's programmer goes from one place to another, plop, I have the MMO source, let's start another MMO. Here you get sued the crap out of. There's a lot more lawyers here than there is in Korea or China put together.
Okay. Somebody put his head down, he doesn't get to talk. You again. Yeah.
Okay. It was interesting that you mentioned that the MMOs let people feel more connected to one another, but like...
Here. They're more connected here, not here.
Okay.
That's the key.
Because I keep reading about stories that, you know, the more connected we are, you know, as a society, it's sort of like the feeling of dissonance or alienation seems to go up, like just not having that face-to-face conversation with somebody does something that you know, that they think they can simulate, you know, with IM or, you know, a phone call or even in, you know, in an online game. Like how do you see that, you know, competing against the connectedness in your mind?
Boy, you ask tough questions to summarize. Holy cow. Can you summarize that? No.
I can try.
Why don't you try?
So the question was, you know, along with this connectedness comes the potential for more alienation because of the indirectness of it. So a sense of indirection or conceptualization almost. Oh yeah, those are, and playing a game, it's one thing if you say, oh, those are little tiny icons on the screen. It's another if you think they're living, breathing people, right? So there's a level of abstraction that we apply to some of these relationships online, which might lead to more alienation versus connection. And I think, again, this is about context of the person involved, right? For some people, online relationships are extremely meaningful and impactful. For others, they're just using you for whatever they want, right? My personal theory is people are actually more who they are online than they are in real life. So, and this is based on an extremely large amount of anecdotal but not statistical evidence. So whenever I see somebody who's a jerk online, no matter how they act in real life, I know who they are deep down inside. Is how I my assessment has become over time of watching this. So I think that by removing the societal kind of punishments that go along with certain behaviors, you get to see more of who people really are. And I'm not sure that's answering your exact question, but I think there's some people who are even more alienated by their online relationships than enriched by them. And because they don't, it doesn't do it for them. So the context is who's the person and how are they conceiving the reality is the difference. Just like some people are more addictive than others. Some people can be, can't stop. Other people can walk away from one of these games in 2.2 seconds. There's just a day where they go, okay, that's enough, next. Other people, you couldn't pry them away from it without, an intervention of some kind. They'll sit there and, the cat thing? The cat ass player, right, who will stay there, until they have a heart attack at the computer because they won't leave. So people are different. That's the other learning is, there's not a audience. There's a whole series of different audiences. And since they're all people, there's 6.2 billion audiences potentially out there. And sometimes you can clump them up in pieces, where there's some place where those 6.2 billion, a few 100,000 or a few million of them will intersect. But they're really just people, which means that the things that create endorphins for them are not always going to be the same. Or the things that create the alienation that you talked about are not always going to be the same.
All the way in the back there. No, you.
Okay.
Yes, you.
I am in the back.
How do you handle groups of people who are intent on causing problems for other people, like the griefing you mentioned earlier? How do you design a game so that can't happen?
How do you design a game so griefing can't happen? Or do you?
Well, griefing is a player skill activity when you get down to it. So it's very difficult to design griefing out of particularly if you have chat, it's impossible to design griefing out of the equation. But regardless, griefing is an expression of, people playing a game in a way that they intend versus the way you might intend for them to play it. That's all it is when you get down to it. So how do you design around it? My experience has led me to believe you make a really damn fun game is the only way to design around it. Because when you look at griefing in the end, there's some people who are just like mentally deficient about it and have to do that, right? And you kill those as quickly and as often as you can out of your game, and you encourage them to try somebody else's game strongly. Mostly by taking away everything they ever have every time they show up, as quickly as humanly possible. So, but the real thing, when you look at griefers in general, mostly they run out of game but aren't ready to leave the environment. So they start experimenting, and the experimentation leads to things that we might call griefing. So they're trying to find another way to play your game. The ones that kind of turn versus are already are ones who are trying to play the game in a way to find some new fun in it that's not there for them. They've run out of content, or they've decided that the game isn't fun the way it is and they want to try to find a new way to play it. So the number one way to get rid of griefing is make a really great game that keeps them compelled. And maybe even think about letting them win. Because one thing MMOs aren't good about is letting you win. Meaning that you can say, I won, I can quit now. We're really bad about trying to keep people beyond their prime. Rather than saying, you won, why not let you go do something else for a while, and then when we have something else for you, you can come back. And again, City of Heroes is the great example of a game you could play, quit, and come back to. No game had actually done that before that. All the games before that, you divorced and you never came back to. Because, you know, once you're divorced, you go, been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and when I come back, it's not the same. So I don't want it anymore. Even if I'm, you know, have some good feelings, you know, that I want to, oh yeah, but then you come back and you go, oh yeah, but all the old stuff's still here too, crap. So, next.
Next.
Mm-hmm.
Here you go.
How do you share technology in an industry that loves to keep secrets?
How do you share technology in an industry that loves to keep secrets?
So you don't.
Okay.
Or you buy middleware. You know, middleware is shared technology. That's what it is. When you go buy middleware, you're sharing somebody else's tech. I think that, you know, the industry being secretive, the secretive stuff is really more about business than game making. When you get down to it, if you ever go to the Game Developers Conference in California, you'll find out that everybody talks to, and I've never seen in almost any industry that I've had some intersection with, the level of openness, kind of almost anarchistic, collegial behavior among game people and anything else. Because in the end, we were all probably misfits to begin with. And we're so happy to find other misfits that we can't keep our mouths shut about stuff.
It's really
so
true.
the business stuff is secret, but it's pretty rare that the other stuff. And the technology, I mean, very few people have a technology edge for any appreciable time. Technology is commodity when you get down to it. You know, the one game a year will be the technological tour de force. And guess what? It won't sell very well because it's running on the highest end hardware, of which there's very little, you know. So all these, you know, super cool games that show off your computer tend to be much lower sellers than you might expect.
Over there.
What was Sony's new game experience that made you want to leave them? What was that?
Oh, what was the new game experience that made you want to leave Sony on?
Oh, it's just a fundamental change to the entire game play structure. You know,
in Star Wars Galaxies.
In Star Wars Galaxies. I don't want to go into the details, but I mean, it was fundamentally quite different game. And it probably wasn't a bad game idea, but it wasn't something to do to a game that, in my mind, it wasn't something to do to a game that already existed. And, you know, I think that, you know, again, I would have loved to have seen it succeed, because if it had, it would have meant that my worldview was flawed and I would have actually been able to integrate some new learning. You know, and I could have done much more cool things with already existing games than can be done today.
Any other questions? Sure.
I have 2 questions. Okay, where does most of the time and money go to in online game development? As in, like, why does it take maybe 4 or 6 years and tons of money? Like, what makes them different?
Stop. We'll do that one.
Where does all the money and time go in MMO development? Why do they take so long and cost so much?
So this is a game development question, not just an MMO. The only difference between a game, a regular game, and an MMO is the amount of content and the amount of other things that you have to do besides the game. So the rule of thumb is an MMO is about 3 times bigger than a normal game, but it's 10 times more complex. Not because you're making it 3 times bigger, but because there's more moving parts. And when you do that, it's not a simple add, it's a multiplier. So the complexity is a real driver. But where does the money go? The money goes to content. So if a typical PS3 or Xbox 360 game takes $15 to $25 million to develop now, really closer to the higher end of that than the lower end, you need to think, oh, I'm making a game 3 times bigger. What does that mean? It means a crap load of money. And it's not just we're spending money on people. All money goes to people. Hardly any of the money goes to anything else. It all goes to people. We are a totally people-dependent business. Yeah, you can go buy middleware. Ooh, I can spend $1 million. $1 million is 10 people years, 8 people years. That's all it is. You know, get 10 people, $10 million a year. Next. You know, that's what they kind of cost you, because we all have expensive, highly paid, very technical, very proficient people. It doesn't mean right out of school you make $100,000, but when you look at what it costs to have the overhead and everything around an employee, the rule of thumb I use it's $100,000 a person or more. When it's all said and done. So it's really about the number of bodies it takes to do it. And most of those bodies, what are they doing? They're building either features or content, data that's being used by those features. That's what it's all going to. It's not going to, oh yeah, the server. Okay, the server team's 6 people. It takes another 80 people to make the game. Ouch. I wish it was just the server. But it's the game itself. And again, look at a standard console game, and you'll see the same thing. Most of the money goes to the content. Second question now.
When do you think that will ever change in the future? Maybe to the point where maybe it won't take as much time or money? Or is this something that's always going to be the case?
Will we ever get to the point where game development, if I can generalize, will cost less?
As cheap to write as a novel.
Never going to happen.
I know. So, I think that the challenge is, as long as it's a multidisciplinary activity, which we are, the intersection of several disciplines. Music people can make music, right? Graphic artists can make graphic art. Programmers can program. We're the intersection of all that, which means not only do we have to be able to do all that, we have to integrate all that together. And we have that, strange thing called interactivity, which is an art form in and of itself that isn't well understood. And that typically, we don't even have a language to describe it before we make it. Really. We describe everything we do in the language of other games that we've hopefully commonly played, is the best that we can do today. And that means that it's poorly understood until you actually get in front of it and play it. So I think that, are there ways to make games which are not the kind of games that we're talking, not the big AAA games? Fast? Yes. But it's not the same experience as making a big, monster game that is, the peak experience of gaming in the big scheme of things. The thing to think about that peak experience, though, is it's only reaching a relatively small audience versus other things you can do. So gaming is much bigger than console games or PC games or big online PC games. Gaming is much bigger than that. There's many more opportunities. And some of those opportunities are much faster and cheaper to do than the stuff that we happen to work in, which is heinously complex and expensive and not as risk-taking as we'd like it to be, right?
That's for sure.
All right.
And when you're trying to cut costs, it means you're cutting bodies. That's the really painful part. When your publisher inevitably tells you you've got to cut your budget, the only thing that matters is the people.
Yeah, there's not like this
that's all
stuff that we're not buying widgets that we're manufacturing into other widgets. It's all people.
Yeah, that's if publishers just
This
got
gentleman
that.
way over here.
There was where?
Way over here.
Oh, go.
You couldn't see him.
Going back to the earlier comment about, people showing their true nature online through being jerks by playing online. Could it ever be the case that, would that be an indication of bad game design if a player simply was employing the optimal strategy and you happen to look like a real big jerk for doing so? And if that's the case, is that something you like or dislike, or maybe it's something that's just inherent in, maybe more competitive games where MMO is more cooperative? It might not be such an issue.
God, you guys ask long, tough questions. You said earlier that people act more in alignment with their true nature. They may be more true to themselves online than they are in the real world. But is it possible that you might create a game where being a jerk is the optimal strategy, and is that a problem? Does that summarize the question? Okay.
So that's perfect because, UO was that game. My personal feeling was we were creating more digital sociopaths than any game before it or since at some level. So because we made it to where to win, how did you win? To be the most amoral, was the way to win. Basically, that was the way to win. So if you can, anytime you do a game, you're teaching. And you got to decide what are you trying to do, and you can do that consciously or unconsciously. But the truth was, what Raph was trying to do was set up a a world where people could do either one, but the truth was in that world, to succeed, you were more likely to succeed one way than another, right? And he was always disappointed that, you know, the people didn't band up and become good people, and after a while he figured it out. He figured out why that was. You know, he didn't tilt the playing field at all. He left it level, and chaos overcomes good every time in a level playing field, particularly where there's no stakes involved, you know, for good. When there's no stakes involved for good, you know, good can't be coherent, and evil is highly coherent. You know, as long as there's lots of sheep to be shorn, they're highly coherent. So yes, the way you make a world, people will play to win, is the core thing there. So as an author, you know, you have authorial responsibility. If you set up a game to be played a certain way, you should expect that people will play it to win.
I guess my other question following that up would be, would that be something you tested for? Trying to, I guess, arrive at an optimal strategy seems pretty hard to do when you're, I guess, still in a small beta or something. But when you throw it out to the public, you're always going to get some kind of unexpected results. So at that point, how much, I guess, ownership do you still have once you shift the game? Do you really feel like you can shift the playing field? Do you feel like you would start, I guess, rewarding the good behavior if you actually want your game played a certain way? If you change what the optimal strategy was after the fact?
It's tough to test a game to find the optimal strategy until you throw that huge audience that you hope comes along after you ship it. So how much ownership do you have of that problem after you ship, and how much can you do to address it, I think is...
Well, every online game tunes their game after they ship to some degree, right? And they always face pain for doing it, because it's a statement of, we didn't foresee this stuff, you know, and I think that that's natural. I think that, you know, so do you still have responsibility? Sure. You know, the question is, what are you about, right? What are you up to when you do that? You know, are you trying to improve the game for the, you know, have the players express the desire for the improvement? Are you trying to improve your retention? Are you trying to get more people to join the game? You know, you have, along with the authorial responsibility, you also have intention typically behind things. Oh, and if you have the intention, we want the game to be more balanced. That's why we do stuff. So we're going to balance this, and we've determined that this is too strong and this is too weak, and we're going to change that. Every game does that. Even standalone games do that to some degree, right? They patch their game when they find things are going on that don't work well. So I think you're going to see those things. I don't think that's a big deal in the big scheme of things. The question is, you know, what degree are you doing it at, and how fundamentally broken was it when it first got out there, and how much reasonably of that could you have foreseen versus not. You know, I think that people have been making MMOs long enough to where they have some insight into the character of people. And where Raph came from, he came from the mud world, and you know, I have to tell you, a community of 3,000 people acts completely different than 30, acts completely different than 300,000. And my theory behind this is pretty simple. In a village, you don't do stuff because you're going to get caught, and everybody knows who you are. You have zero anonymity. You move to, you know, kind of a medium city, you can kind of get away with more, but you can't get away with everything. You move to the megatropolis, you can get away with anything, because you can just move, you know, 8 blocks away and no one will ever see you again, right? And you feel disconnected from the rest of the people because you're one person in a mass to go with that. So what MMOs became, UO and beyond, were mega cities, and before that they were hamlets, you know, little villages, and they were really fun and nice, and everybody was so good and pleasant, and social pressure worked, and in UO and beyond, no social pressure worked at all. None. No, zero effect. Total new learning. And I suspect that the first game that goes beyond WoW will be in a whole nother class of, you know, that does sandbox versus, you know, straight game, will be in a whole nother class of learning that we don't even understand at all today. And that's what I like that about the